Hello, everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoyed this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Damn it. If her grandmother had heard such a foul expression from her pupil's lips, she would have deprived her of sweets for a week and make her wash her mouth out with soap and water. But as the grandmother was fast asleep at the late midnight hour, Juliana remained unpunished. At last, having stopped pacing her room like a caged animal in a zoo, the young girl plumped down on the bed, which squeaked pitifully with the shell netting, raked the teddy bear into a pile, and burying herself in its worn chocolate-colored fur, silently wept. How? Well, how could she be such a fool, fall so low? However, Juliana's brain obligingly told her there was still time before the immediate fall, 21 hours and 30 minutes. The exact time was told to her by the dial of the alarm clock, on which she cast a tear-fogged glance. It was in that time frame that she was to report to the hideous, impossible, heartless wretch in order to. It all happened 10 days ago. Julian was in the school library where she had just returned the books she had read and had volunteered to help the old librarian, who was suffering from sciatica from the rainy weather and was shelving them herself. "You can't reach it, little one," came a mocking voice over her shoulder, and the schoolgirl shrieked and turned around abruptly. Scared her? Because of the height difference, she jammed her nose into the voice owner's chest at armpit level. "No," she answered sharply, and gritting her teeth, she looked up, glaring boldly and contemptuously. Alfred, the terror of the whole school, a bully and just the embodiment of all male vices. The distance between the shelves left no room for maneuvering, but Juliana still twisted, turned, sliding her side involuntarily on his thigh, and stood on tiptoe, reached up a little more, and the book about the lives of the greatest ancient Greek philosophers would be in place. She decided that she would just ignore Alfred, shit on him, not this pleasure. Grandmother, by the way, even in her mind forbade swearing, but her granddaughter allowed herself to do it in her mind. Because life was such that sometimes got through on emotions and nothing could not be done about it. Julian repeated to herself that she didn't care, that he continued to stand behind her, probably squinting mockingly at her blue eyes, so piercing that he seemed to see right through you. There was a rustling sound as Alfred scratched the blonde back of his head. What an unseemly habit. And then he suddenly snatched the book from her, yanked it out of her hand, and slid it back onto the shelf himself. "I didn't ask." She choked on air before she could finish, because he immediately grabbed her shoulders and turned her around to face him, literally slamming her back into the shelving unit. "We need to talk. I have nothing to say to you." Julian raised her voice, and then, remembering where she was, switched to a whisper. "I don't want to talk to you." "Is that so? After all you've done?" He lowered his tone too, as if to tease me. "By the way, you've caused me so much damage. You called everyone up to the director. Losses. Who would even think of trading test answers?" "Businessman," hummed Alfred. "You're a dishonest man, you're a liar, you're a..." "You tell me you're not a gentleman." His hand suddenly moved from the girl's rounded shoulder to her thin, tall neck. Her fingers ran along the edge of the white starched collar of her uniform dress, as if groping, outlining the contour of her collarbones. "What is it about you, huh? You dress like a grandmother and act like one. What are you doing?" The girl whispered. Her voice was quiet, barely audible, no longer out of habit of following the library rules, but because of the strange numbness spreading through her body from where Alfred touched. "Yes, so," he grinned, but with just his lips his eyes were cold. There was nothing to do. He pulled away, took a step to the side, and so some distance finally appeared between them. The obsession was over. Nothing to do? Julian gasped for air. Alfred stood with his hands in the pockets of his jeans, on top of a t-shirt with some soccer club symbols and a black jacket, obviously a size or two larger than necessary. Despite his tall height of almost 190 centimeters, the guy was not very broad in the shoulders and was terribly complex about it, but kept it, of course, in secret. Alfred was the storm of the school, elusive, and at the same time a well-known bully for the whole neighborhood. Well, for his half of it, exactly. And he was also a repeater with a long history of delay in the 3rd, 6th, and 8th grades. It was hard to understand what was the terrible truth about him and what was a terrible rumor, but in any case, it would be hard to find a person more opposite in terms of qualities and features noticeable at first sight compared to Juliana. She, like him, turned 18 this spring, at the very beginning of the season, when the first drop appeared from the roofs. But if Alfred looked 20, Juliana, much younger than her age, the principal, the canteen girl, and some other people admired it, loved to compare how different the schoolgirl looked from her peers. That was different and in general lived right, took care of Juliana, Leslie's grandmother, who for 10 years has also been her guardian after the death of her parents, who died in a car accident, and the only one of her kindred person in the world. Two people who belonged to very different eras lived in a 3-room apartment Stalinka. In her working past, Leslie taught history and literature, almost 30 years lived in the far north. Her pension was decent, she had enough to live on. However, an outside observer might decide that the life of grandmother and her granddaughter was peculiar. Juliana received an exceptionally strict domestic upbringing. Grandmother had no doubt that the modern world could not be trusted with a child. Grind young, stupid creature, destroyed the soul, morality, crippled the future. Leslie herself kept herself apart, socialized only with a few, worthy in her opinion people about her age. And if there was anyone who had the audacity to say that she was treating the child somehow wrong, that person received such an angry, logically structured, and reasoned response that he himself was guilty of everything. And in general, shame on his head. And in time, the neighbors got used to it. After all, every family has its own rules. Everyone knows that. And since Leslie's pupil was cleanly dressed and frozen in winter, was always well-fed, well-behaved, since Leslie herself had an impeccable reputation for the last 50 years. Then in time, everyone calmed down and even began to envy a little. After all, Leslie brought up her granddaughter so that just a gold, not a girl, not at all like modern children, the joy of the family, just a little good-natured lady, not a girl. Until the 5th grade, Juliana was homeschooled and then still went to school. And she was the black sheep. Her teachers praised her for her diligence and intelligence. They gave her A's. Once only got a C for an essay on how I spent my summer. In it, a 6th grader described how she had spent the whole summer reading works on world economy and the history of capitalism. The teacher said that it was very informative, but I would like to know about her personal, so to speak, life, impressions, adventures. Was it really just books all summer? Juliana answered boldly that her grandmother had a friend, Alexander Schwartz, who was 90 years old on his birthday and had written books on the history of capitalism. That's why it was necessary to read them all, and then, according to the results, so to speak, write a poem and read it to the Jubilee. Everything else is selfishness and vanity against the background of such an important matter. If Juliana had said this one-on-one, the teacher might not have gotten angry, but the confrontation happened in front of the whole class. The class fell down from laughter and the teacher gave her a C. Because of this C, the girl became ill. Such a hysteria happened, which ended with fainting, that an ambulance had to be called. Naturally, the teacher replaced the C with a B, for goodness sake. But Juliana still long walked in sadness and told everyone that she was a talentless and a failure, since her essay was evaluated only on some pathetic 3. However, Juliana stood out not only the specifics of this study. She dressed very original. The closet of the pupil, of course, was occupied by her grandmother and consisted of things good, new, but only sewed on the fashion of the 30s of the last century. And that they were not the most fashionable, dressy styles of that era. The shoes were also the most modest, flat shoes, not stained. Her classmates were growing up, becoming teenagers, young girls. They were learning to use makeup, getting manicures, coloring their hair. Julian couldn't afford any of that. Not that she didn't want to. Sometimes she thought her grandmother was too strict. But then she remembered that Leslie had a weak heart, and that in the modern world, life was not so easy because of such loose morals, and any rudiments of rebellious sentiments withered like wheat without water in the hot summer. However, Juliana was not one of those bad girls who can be transformed only by a beauty salon. By adulthood, the girl's figure had become feminine, soft, and lush in the right places, outlines. She had a slightly elongated face with high cheekbones, a straight nose, and a wide, sensual mouth. Gray eyes were framed by black, fluffy lashes. Her long brown hair was never seen in anything but one of three hairstyles: two braids on each side, one braid in the back, or one braid arranged in a wreath around her head. Add to this refined manners, shyness, modesty, and the habit of keeping in the shadow of everything bright, noisy, provocative, modern, and also the fact that almost all her interests and daily activities were filtered through her grandmother's opinion on whether it was worthy, whether it was decent. If some meticulous outsider were to analyze Juliana like a strange exotic animal, he would easily find the reasons why people around her perceived her as a strange person. And that was putting it mildly, and only in exceptional cases, such as in clashes with Alfred, who for the last 2 years had increasingly made her the object of his attacks, light but offensively barbed. Only in rare cases, Julian's usual calmness would come off and she would begin. Not that she would be rude, never, but to answer sharply and defend herself vigorously. "So you have nothing to do," Julian repeated. "Well, go and study, you idiot. Or help out. Someone broke a window in class 3. It's blowing. There are kids there. You need to." "Wow, you're quick." Alfred smiled as usual. "No, you're acting like a grandmother and thinking the same way. You know what? I've sorted out my problems. I won't be expelled. Thanks to Maria Ivanovna, our class teacher. She covered for me. She, understands. If you give her a hand." "What?" "Yes, Maria. She has 4 children. She's a kind-hearted, fair-minded person. You don't believe me? You want to bet? She's gonna give John an A on the test because his daddy brought her candy and stuff." John was an incorrigible loser, and no one in the class doubted that he would fail the math final. Julian had heard of bets, or rather, she had read about them. In some books, no people made them, and usually it didn't end well. There was no way she was going to take some stupid bet. But today was not the right day at all. First, the grandmother thought her granddaughter had splashed herself in the morning. The girl swore she never went near her grandmother's dressing table, but she made her go to the bathroom to clean herself up anyway. Then it turned out that the grandmother just thought that in the closet there was a moth, so she put perfume and sprayed there. That's why Julian's clothes smelled. The grandmother didn't apologize, and Juliana felt unjustly offended. Then before school, she ran to the store to get tights. It was not a boutique, but a very modest store of youth clothes, and it was here that she and her grandmother sometimes came when they needed to buy Juliana something that Leslie could not sew. Usually it was something from outerwear. This time, one of the sales girls did not just watch from a distance as usual, but approached Juliana. The girl thought that she probably did that because she didn't have her grandmother with her now, or she wouldn't have dared to approach. Her grandmother couldn't stand all those consultants and knew how to chase them away. The saleswoman started talking about new youth clothes, very stylish denim skirts and beautiful sweaters. Julian glanced at this and turned away. No, even if she herself had been wearing what her grandmother sewed for 2 years now, there was no way she was going to upset her and dress differently. "I feel sorry for the girl," sighed behind her back, sharing with a colleague. "What a wild thing to say. How will she, poor thing, live when grandma is gone? Will be lost with such an attitude. She's not adapted to life at all. No, she'll be left without an apartment or lured into a cult. And where do the neighbors and teachers look, eh?" It was hard, painful to hear that. And at the same time, Juliana couldn't help but admit that this woman, Caroline, saw the name on the counselor's name tag. She was right about something. Juliana was really scared to think about the time when she would be alone. Grandma had been talking a lot lately about her grandfather taking her to heaven soon, and she, Juliana, if she misbehaved, she would end her days on the pavement. So, to prevent that from happening, she would have to study hard, protect herself, and be a man of honor. "What's the bet?" Julian blurted out before she could even think about what she was doing. "That's a different conversation." Halford's voice had a purr in it. "If you're right and John fails, I'll pay back the money I won from Toby. Julian nodded. That would be very good. That would be great, because Toby was a third grader from a large family, and he'd lost everything he'd saved from his pocket money for 6 months. And I'll also sign up for these, what's their name? Volunteers. And I'm gonna go to the city park and plant trees. And I'm not gonna swear. Okay. Yes, I agree. Wait, he suddenly grabbed her wrist. You didn't even ask what you know if you lost. What do you want? She opened her eyes. Her wrist burned. It wasn't the pain of the grip that was barely perceptible. It was some other strange perception of his closeness. You agreed to the bet, right? But I did. You know, I don't follow you much. It's too much. But I remember you were talking in literature class about keeping your word. Something about honor was there. It was. The girl exhaled and tensed, preparing to wrench her arm free. Which means you'll keep your word. And if you lose, you come where I tell you to come and spend the night with me. Why? Julian squeaked. Theoretically, the guy was very clear. Only in the brain as an automatic system went off from the logical deciphering of this phrase, to spend the night. Why should we come to your place for the night? Well, don't play dumb. You understand everything, he said simply. And then he let her go, winked, and disappeared as if he vanished among the shelves. Julian stood there, barely breathing, staring blankly at herself. Oh no, what was going to happen to her now? How could she? How dare he? The girl swallowed hard. Had Alfred not had enough of the atrocities he was doing? Why would he do this to her? Why? There you are, the librarian appeared in the aisle. After she had instructed the polite girl to arrange the books, she took time out to have some tea. Oh, why are you so pale? Did you put all the books away? What's new on your list? Yes, that's it, Julian replied, her thoughts wandering far away from the library. Thank you, there's nothing. And she left. Much to the amazement of the old librarian, she didn't even say goodbye. And then the day of the test came. John was sitting next to Julianne, and she realized, peeking carefully, that he had no solutions to the problems, but a lot of nonsense. Finally, everyone handed in their notebooks. Julian cast a triumphant glance at Alfred, who was sitting on the kamkaka. She had no doubt that everything would be as it should be. That justice would prevail, that he would lose, that he would be shamed, and that he would be forced to take the path of correction. He might have promised everything just to annoy her, but in the end it would all have a positive effect on him, of course. And then, it became known that John had gotten a 5. Alfred found her, or rather caught her, just outside the school gates, just growing in front of her so that she crashed into him again. Hi. Hi, the girl replied and lowered her head. Well, 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 why are we so sad? Does it feel bad to lose? But it had to happen sometime. You can't live your whole life so right, so perfect. You're judging me? I tried to go around, but he wouldn't let me. Okay, let's not get into any of your ideas, okay? We had a bet. Now you have to do what we agreed to do. You know, this is kind of fun. If there were anyone else, I'm sure the other girl would have sent the bet in me far away. But you're not like that, are you? You gave your word. So, here you go. He held out some paper. My father had a summer house in the suburbs. There's no one there now. Come Saturday night. Hey, you're not going to cry, are you? Don't worry, I won't bite. We'll have a great time. I'll treat you to kebabs. The doctor said it looked like a heart attack was imminent and hospitalization was necessary. Julian fumbled around, gathering the things she would need at the hospital according to her grandmother's instructions. Leslie was taken away. Julian returned to the apartment, locked the front door, sank down on the banquette in the hallway and covered her face with her hands and sobbed. What a nightmare everything was turning out to be. Just a black streak. And at the same time, it was impossible not to recognize that this misfortune allows her to carry out her plans, because her grandmother will be in the hospital for a few days. And therefore, the fact that her granddaughter did not spend the night at home will not become known to her. Frivolous books, erotic movies, such in the cultural and educational menu, compiled by her grandmother for Juliana was not. Naturally, the young girl had some knowledge about the relationship between the sexes, and the school program introduced to the fact that children are not found in cabbage, and yet, the girl understood that if she thought about what she was going to do a little more, she would simply lose her feelings. Theoretically, in this of course, there was a plus: the date would be canceled. But the downside was she would essentially be betraying her habit of being an honest person. Today you lied about finishing the cutlets and threw them away. Her grandmother had once reprimanded her, and for some reason that incident was particularly sharp in Juliana's memory. And tomorrow, her grandmother narrowed her eyebrows and slapped the missing cutlets in front of her. You'll go stealing, or run over a man with a car at a green light. Grandma, please forgive me, little Julian asked, choking back tears. You're not going to make me finish them, are you? They were in the garbage pail. Leslie stroked the girl's head and then grabbed her ear, pulling her away from the table. Take them out and give them to the stray cats that live in the basement. Stick your hands straight up and throw them down. Grandma, the girl even stopped crying out of fear. We don't have cats under the house, only rats. There are rats there. I don't want to. It's too late, sweetheart, the old woman grinned. You have to take responsibility for your actions. Go. And if the rats bite your fingers, she touched each of the 5 fingers on her granddaughter's left hand, it'll be your own fault. I, my dear, ready to love you in every way, even if you were crooked on your face, even if you study for DS. But if I find out that you're lying, if I find out that you don't keep your word, if you ever lie to me like this again, you'll drive me into a coffin with this, and you won't have a grandmother anymore. You'll go to an orphanage to live. Do you understand? After that, 10-year-old Juliana realized that she would always, all her life be an honest person. And she would not break her word to go and give herself into the hands of the monster in human form. Juliana chose her weekend dress, the most elegant dress, snow white Richelieu fabric, sun skirt, and wing sleeves. Her hair was bound with a dark green ribbon. She decided not to think about what would happen. Until it happened, she decided to take it one step at a time. Gather herself and make sure all appliances were turned off. Leave the apartment and the house. At the bus stop, take a bus to the station where the commuter trains leave from. Get off the light version of the train, and she was a little confused, but she was told the way was to walk across a field. It was not terrible. There were more people walking there, some cheerful company of granny's gardeners. They were singing songs. A young, strong voice suddenly broke into their elderly chorus. The grandmothers marveled at the unusual companion, who, so young, knew the words of the old hymn, but immediately sang again, and so the whole company reached the dacha community. It was separated from a small village with a funny name of Jishiki by a field where in the old days huge herds of cows grazed, and now rare livestock kept by the locals. A little farther south, the village and the dacha estates were surrounded by a river that dried up to the bottom during the hot summer months. Julianne opened her mouth to say that she couldn't come anywhere, because how could she possibly explain her grandmother's absence at night? She didn't even have any friends she could, theoretically, stay overnight, but she didn't say anything. Alfred left the school with a double feeling. On the one hand, he had managed to achieve something that seemed unreal, but on the other hand, he felt as if he had soiled himself in something nasty, dirty. Juliana was different from the other girls, and for more than a year she had been only an object of interested, mocking observation. But then, he began to notice things that others didn't. How good she was, always a straight back, proud, but not haughty, but a sort of, here, the right word for it is aristocratic head planting. This girl never gossiped about others, never brought cheat sheets. It was clear she didn't live an easy life, but no one heard her complain. It seemed that she existed in her own closed, like a soap bubble, world. At recess, she would duck into a book and go deaf. Then one day, she suddenly noticed Alfred was in a bad mood and threw something like, "Don't take offense, she wouldn't understand." This phrase referred to the conversation Alfred had had with his geography teacher for about 10 minutes, who had reprimanded him harshly, and with a switch to personalities for not having done his homework and didn't want to hear about the fact that there was no time for it, because Alfred's apartment was being renovated and he couldn't refuse to help. She always scolded her students harshly for everything after her husband got his paycheck, because, as rumor had it, the lion's share of that salary he took to his mistress, so she found someone to take her anger out on. It was Julian's statement that caught Alfred's eye. He didn't ask for pity. and no one dared tell him what to think or feel. He tried to hurt Julian with taunts, but it was all in vain. He began to observe her more, and he didn't realize how it turned into an obsession. Yes, that word seemed quite right to him, and Alfred didn't want to do anything about it. Why should he? After all, she, in all likelihood, like many other people, already had a certain idea of him, so why disappoint her? And even if he had no chance of gaining her favor in kind, well, so be it. But he would get what he wanted. Julian was greeted by the familiar, adoring smells of her grandmother's late lunch of chicken noodle soup and blueberry puff pastries. But before she sat down at the table, at the very threshold, grandmother asked Juliana what grade her test had gotten at school. Only when she was satisfied with the answer did she tell her to take off her shoes and wash her hands. Then they sat down to watch TV, and some old movie about the Musketeers was on. Then Grandma, though it was already 8 o'clock in the evening, took out the crystal from the cupboard, though she hadn't had time to wash it in the morning, so she had to wash it in the evening, she said, handing her pupil an apron, without which no housework could be done. Then Leslie went to bed. Julian was left to herself. The hands on the dial were approaching midnight, inexorably approaching the coming of Saturday. The girl convulsively sucked in air, leaned back on the bed, closed her eyes. What should she do? Break her word? She could, of course. It was unlikely that for such dishonorable behavior she would be immediately hit by karma, a boomerang. That is, a deserved retribution from fate, which her grandmother was so fond of talking about. And anyway, Julian somehow couldn't imagine how she would exist after. Not to mention that this very thing, the very thing she had signed up for. Julian sat up abruptly on the bed, then paced the room. Then a "damn it" came from her lips. Julian was more and more inclined to tell her grandmother, and let her scold, let her punish. But then she would have the opportunity to think of two minds, how to be now. Grandmother would not leave her, would comfort her and say that, of course, there could be only a negative answer. "Granddaughter," came the voice of an old woman in the hallway. The girl shuddered. "Why isn't Granny asleep? She can't read minds, I think." "Granddaughter," Leslie repeated in a hoarse, weak voice. "I have a heart attack. Call an ambulance." "Who are you here to see, honey?" one of the old ladies asked. "Just here." Julian frowned. "Some acquaintances asked me to drop something off." She waved her hand in the direction, toward the woods, not the houses. "Well, good luck to you," replied the old woman, realizing that the girl did not want to talk about herself. "All right." Alfred's cottage was really near the forest and stood at the very edge of the community, and it looked abandoned. Julian shuddered at his choice of a place for a date. She knew he didn't live alone and was being raised by a distant relative after Alfred's father had been imprisoned for theft a few years ago. Julian also knew that the boy's father had passed away last year. She had sympathized with him then and even tried to get close to him, to comfort him. Maybe he had misunderstood her attention then, had made up something for himself. By evening it was noticeably colder, and the girl chose her clothes according to the weather, which was still sunny and warm. But now it didn't seem to matter at all that her body was shivering. What was frightening was something else. Finally, Julian found herself on the porch and knocked on the door. "Hi," he said, and a look of amazement flashed across his face as if he was sure she wasn't coming. "Hi," she said, thinking that awkward mutual greetings like this were becoming a habit. Julian didn't want to make any habits with this guy. "Come on in," he stepped aside, letting me into the house. The girl froze, hesitated, as if something nightmarish was waiting for her beyond the threshold. However, in fact, it was so. Inside, the house turned out to be as she had expected it to be, in need of repair and general cleaning. The furniture had been brought in on a what-not-to-spare basis, and the floors were painted a luscious orange. Julian remembered that the same floors had been in her grandmother's house in the country. She had been there only a few times, and then she had sold it because she didn't have the energy to travel to keep everything in order, and it was too far away to use it as a summer house. But the main reason for getting rid of the family nest was that she needed money for her, Juliana, nurturing. This word nurturing, grandmother used, by the way, when she wanted to reproach her granddaughter. "They say I spend so much effort raising you and you still manage to catch a cold in winter," tear a new dress on a walk, refuse to drink fish oil for immunity, do not put away toys, lisp. The list of reasons for reproach was endless. And only when Juliana grew up, or rather when she was 15, she began to think that she was not to blame for everything and everything. Just sometimes, Grandma needed a fight, and the person to do it with that will was just her kindergartner. So, do you want a drink? Alfred threw awkwardly, escorting the girl deep into the house. I don't drink, she said, glancing at him warily. I already know. I'm asking about the tea. No. Coffee? No, I'm not after that. And you? We can. She clenched her hands so white her knuckles turned white. I know I lost the bet, and I'll keep my word. I'm ready, but can't you? Hurry up. She threw the last words at him angrily, resolutely crossing the distance between them. She stood close again, and he could almost feel her breath. Now Alfred looked dumbfounded. I know I have a reputation, but why are you attacking me like? Courtesans used to be called courtesans, didn't they? Yes. There, you see. Turns out we can speak the same language, he smirked. Okay, that was an unfortunate comparison. I'm sorry. But do you think I'm going to attack you like a barbarian? Julian said nothing. Alfred sighed, sniffled oddly, and stepped back, shoving his hands into the pockets of his jeans. It was quite dusky in this part of the cottage. Light poured in from the ajar door on the right, and there were two in this cluttered hallway or cluttered living room. Or rather, a cluttered living room, because there couldn't possibly be a living room at the cottage. Julian was more inclined toward the latter, given the fireplace she'd noticed, which must have been unheated for 100 years, so dusty and littered with debris. But she was much more interested in Alfred than in the surroundings. On the way here, her brain had been drawing the most fantastic, disgusting pictures. She imagined being at the mercy of a cynical, immoral scumbag. But why did it seem that now she was just a boy who wanted to seem tough, like the bad guys in action movies, but was desperately afraid of it? So, you're shivering and you'll sneeze tomorrow. Apparently, the prolonged silence in which they were frozen, like two exhibits in an abandoned museum, began to irritate him. Come on, I'll put the tea on. Julian doggedly stomped after her. What's all this for? What? Drinking me tea. It makes sense because you're cold. What does it matter if you're going to? What are you doing? Squealed the girl as Alfred pulled the sweater over his head. The guy froze and rounded his eyes. She took a step back. Another. She put her back against the wall and put her purse in front of her in a desperate protective gesture. No, please, I'm not ready. A moment later, a scratchy woolen article of clothing flew into her face. Stupid. Here, it's cold to look at. Alfred, who was left in a t-shirt, turned his back to her and began to work on the gas stove. Put it on. I'm not peeking. The desire for warmth outweighed the embarrassment of using something that was not hers, much less a man's, and Julian tangled in the sleeves and pulled on the sweater. Thank you, she said quietly, so he wouldn't have heard. You know, I'm really surprised you came. It's just, doing something on a word of honor, it's kind of old-fashioned these days. Can't do otherwise, she shrugged, sitting down at the table. What if I bet you something worse, like stealing something? That would never happen, Julian declared smugly. So, what happened is within the bounds of your morality. A teapot and a couple of cups were placed on the table. All three items had clearly once belonged to an obvious set. That's not what I meant to say, the girl muttered. You cheated, caught me giving my word before I knew what the condition was. When he filled the cup, she wrapped her palms around it, her body desperate for some warmth, though it was terribly hot. All right, I give up. I am a scoundrel and a seducer. But the end justified the means. Smiling, he sat down beside me. Is there nothing for tea? She asked timidly, suddenly realizing that her stomach was protesting against the empty drink. Julian had somehow missed lunch and dinner as she pondered nervously. I had chips and a candy bar, but I ate them while I was waiting for you. Oh no, I'm lying. Here's half a chocolate bar. He added it to the table. I see. For a while there was silence in the kitchen, where a lone light bulb shone, apart from the sounds of tea drinking. What was that? Julian was suddenly alert. I didn't hear anything, Alfred said nonchalantly. I heard something. You're imagining things. Is there anyone else in the house? The girl went cold. No. You're lying. I'm not lying. There's no one here. The guy nodded at the doorway. Well, except for him. A puppy came into the room. He was a well-fed colobus, a mix of sheepdog and street Bernard, and he wiggled his nose and paw funny. The first was out of lively young curiosity, the second because it was wrapped in a bandage. Oh, he's so cute. Julian jumped down from her chair and was next to the puppy in no time. Grandma's strict upbringing included, among other rules, one that read, "No animals in my house. Don't go near dogs in the street. They will chew you up and give you fleas." The puppy recoiled, but then, attracted by the fact that the stranger was wearing a sweater that smelled of his master, he moved forward. Where did he come from? He followed me to the station on the way here. He must have hurt his paw on the street. I patched it up a little. Are you gonna keep it? I have a right to. Alfred grinned unhappily. As long as he lives at the dacha, and of course, when I leave here on weekdays, he'll stay with the neighbors. I've already arranged it, and then I'll take it. I've decided to rent an apartment for myself. I'm looking for options. I can't bring him to the place where I live now. They'll throw him out on the street. Alfred whistled, calling the dog. But the girl didn't let the doggy take a step and picked him up in her arms, returned to the table, pulled out a chair, sat down and settled the puppy on her lap. The dog, she stated a fact already known to the boy. He's so cute. He reached out to stroke it too, and their fingers met in the thick, silky fur. And the fur must have electrified, because a strange, lingering sensation hit them both. Julian froze, wide-eyed as she watched the boy's face grow closer. "How beautiful you are," he whispered. "That's it, you're finished." The convict grinned and pulled something from his belt that glinted like steel in the cold light of the moon. They were separated by a mere 3 or 4 meters. He was not a coward, but he was not a fool to stay heroically in the house and engage in hand-to-hand combat. Taif, Taif, a puppy threw itself at his master's feet. He wasn't a coward either, but he was too young, and when the house had been broken into, he'd just been scared and huddled under the couch, crying in his own puppy way. And now that 2 good people he knew were there, he risked getting out. Julian took an extra couple of seconds to bend down and pick up the baby. "How did you?" Alfred's eyes widened as they stepped over, or rather jumped over, the convict lying on the floor. He had not expected such a thing from his unwilling guest, but all questions could wait. Without collusion and without wasting any more breath on superfluous words, the young people with the puppy under their armpits flew out of the house and rushed across the plot to the neighbor's cottage. They didn't even turn around to see if they were being followed. They ran up on the porch and banged on the door. "Help! Call the police! Help me!" The further events merged into several long hours, later recalled as if through a fog. Alarmed neighbors came to help, and soon those who had broken into Alfred's father's cottage in the middle of the night were caught. They were indeed, as Juliana thought at once, escaped prisoners. An ambulance also arrived, and the doctor who examined Alfred said that in principle it was nothing serious. His jaw was not broken, and that was the main thing. "Young lady, don't take any more risks like that," the doctor said to Juliana. "Alone on such a big man with a frying pan. Dashing, but, and if you had missed, I can't imagine. And what else could I do?" Now that everything was over, Juliana could not stop shivering, although she was drinking a second mug of scalding hot tea. And 2 woolen plaids, given by kind-hearted dacha neighbors, were thrown over her shoulders. Alfred, disobeying Juliana, looked out into the street just as the very convict who had attacked him was being led to the police car. "I wish I had time to fight back." Alfred spat on the ground and shook his fist at the man. He cursed and scrambled to his feet, trying to throw himself back into the fight. But of course, no one would let him. Alfred heard a few more things about himself and his father. "It's all clear," he muttered, walking back into the house and sitting down at the table, leaning over his cup sluggishly. And then he explained to Juliana who it was. It turned out that 2 prisoners had escaped from the very colony where Alfred's father was, and they hadn't chosen his cottage by chance. He had been a lifelong liar, Alfred said. He was both eager to speak and uncomfortable with his own need for candor. Julian also noticed for the umpteenth time that Alfred called his father he. But in principle, such an oddity was already familiar since the boy's parent had gone to the colony 4 years ago. Alfred almost never said father or Lawrence. He lie here too. I thought it would add to this influence in the zone. The young man grinned bitterly. He was still at home when he was still lying about the gold buried in the dacha, which he had stolen back in the 90s. You can imagine, usually Alfred spoke about his father without emotion, but now, apparently, against the background of the experience, his intonation oozed indignation. He lied to me that there was gold in the garden, and I was just a little kid back then. So I took a shovel and dug joyfully from fence to fence. Where did I get my strength from? He was laughing. You mean there's no gold? Julian asked. No, of course not. Everyone here was using metal detectors about 10 years ago. The summer house was rented out to some students. They listened to that nonsense and started to turn everything upside down looking for it. And there was never any gold. That's it. It's so simple. He couldn't accept the fact that he was no longer the big bandit everyone was afraid of, that he had once lost at cards. Mom left us back then. That's probably why he lost his mind. So he created the illusion that he had money, but it wasn't time to take it yet. What a bastard. Alfred raised his voice. Even before he died, he had time to make a mess. How do I know that no one else will come here, in El Dorado, in the middle of nowhere? I had enough. I'm leaving. It was none of her business. And if she had had the opportunity to leave and never see Alfred again in her life, but a little earlier, before the attack, she would have gladly taken it and would even have given a lot for such a gift of fate. But now, she couldn't explain it to herself, and she didn't want to get into the intricacies of her feelings, but she just suddenly realized that she cared about Alfred. It was discouraging, frightening, made her feel like a bad, spoiled girl. But Julian couldn't change that, even if she wanted to. Will you pass your exams? Alfred extended his hand and snapped his fingers in front of her nose. Wake up. What exams? What will this school give me? What about going to college? She whispered. The woolen blanket slipped off her shoulders, but the girl didn't even notice the chill. Yeah, the institute. People like me, missing. Nothing in life is meant to be. Alfred averted his eyes. No. You're not lost. You don't have to be. There's no such thing as being like your father, or that you have to live your whole life unhappy. You can be different, whatever you want. Julian's voice sounded firm and determined now, as if she were speaking to a large audience, like her class, and had something very important to tell them. What do you know about me? Alfred said it in his usual mocking and superior tone, but there was a different kind of loneliness and lostness in his eyes. Like he was suddenly alone in the world. Julian knew, in fact, that he was. She could have sworn this guy didn't have any really close friends, the kind you trusted like yourself, the kind who wouldn't let you go to waste. And then the thought struck like lightning. But does she have any? A grandmother is something else. A family person, she replaced mom and dad, but still, it's different. And she doesn't have any friends, Julian herself. You're right, she replied. I know the rumors. And what you yourself have said. And that's not much. And you don't need more than that. Alfred rose abruptly from the table. Let me call you a cab home. No way. Steve, the neighbor and owner of the cottage, intervened in the conversation. He hadn't overheard the conversation. He just had his own business with the late Sprouts in the next room and overheard a lot of things. Steve had known Alfred for 3 years, that is, exactly since he had bought a plot here. At first, he had thought Alfred was a troublemaker and a criminal. That's how the distant relative of the young man, who became his guardian, had described it. But then Steve changed his opinion, if only because no one in the cottage community and in the nearby village could not recall any bad deeds in which Alfred was involved. If only because this kid was seen in good deeds here. He helped to fix the barn for livestock one grandmother in the village. He helped to find a lost cat in some townspeople who came to the cottage for summer vacation. He participated in clearing the pond of all sorts of garbage, and even once restrained the local gang of hooligans when they got to molest the girls' daughters of the owners of the lost cat. All in all, Alfred was, in Steve's opinion, a great guy. He didn't really understand what he had in common with Juliana, and decided that it was probably his girlfriend, a romantic interest, so to speak. Why don't you come and sleep at our place? There's plenty of room. I'll give you some bedding. We'll set up 2 places right away, youngsters. We'll have tea in the morning." Steve waved his hand. "And then I'll give you both a lift to the station. All right?" Juliana and Alfred nodded in agreement, so they all did. "Grushenka, at last you're back." A neighbor who looked out of the apartment across the hall rushed to the girl. "Good afternoon, Selima." The girl smiled politely. "I slept over at an acquaintance's place." She had already prepared a lie about the fact that this acquaintance had a small child, and she needed to work the night shift, and her husband too. And so, until they adjust the schedules as necessary, they are looking for friends who will sit with the baby. But from the next words of the neighbor, Juliana almost fainted. "I got a call. I know your grandmother well," Selena said quickly. "They called from the hospital. They couldn't reach you." "Oh, what a grief. And she was in good health." What's wrong with Grandma?" Julian leaned against the cold entryway wall. "I was called, so the neighbor was in no hurry to get to the point. Anyway, during the night Leslie got worse. The doctors were frantic." "Oh, what a grief. You're all alone," the neighbor longed. Grandmother, is she dead?" Julian's hand rose and lay on her neck. "How hard it is to breathe. It felt like the sky was going to fall on my head. Was it really like this? Ridiculous everything. She was far away from her grandmother in her last hour." "No, why would you think that?" Spit." The neighbor waved her hands. "Don't you listen to me at all? What am I telling you, stupid? I'm telling you that you are alone. Since Grandma went to the hospital, it must be hard for you alone. Anyway, by morning she was feeling better, and they called me again to say that they had never seen a patient recover so soon. They say that in such a manner, in a week she'll be home." "Oh, Grushenka, why have you turned so pale? You look as if you were undead." "Selena," the girl shook her head and turned away, jingling her keys to open her apartment door. "You can't talk at all. That's why they don't like you in the whole building." And she went in and slammed the door, extremely impolite, without even saying goodbye to her neighbor. Selena stood with her mouth hanging open. Julian had never let herself do anything like this before. "However," said the neighbor, and then, remembering that she had put the chicken on the boil for soup and left the fire on high, she yelped and ran back to her room. Her grandmother was indeed soon discharged home, and life in Juliana's small family quickly returned to normal. But then it became clear that something was changing. Juliana often thought about Alfred. They hadn't seen each other since they parted at the station. The boy said he would go on the next train, but for now he wanted to walk a little more and think about everything. Sometimes walking down the street, Juliana caught herself looking for him with her eyes. Why? She couldn't explain it to herself clearly, but she remembered what he had said at the station before the train started. He had said he was very sorry for her and apologized for the idiotic bet. "I thought I'd feel better if I got you. It's only made it worse." He didn't explain anything else. He just disappeared. Julian thought once about finding him herself. Just go to this house. Maybe he hadn't had time to move out of this family's apartment yet. But each time she restrained herself from such pointless foolishness. Then, as the train pulled away from Juliana, Alfred looked at her and then, pulling the puppy gently by the leash, went for a walk. He really had a lot to think about. Time after time, he replayed the events of the previous evening. But until the moment when the strangers had broken into the house, when Juliana had yet to arrive, Alfred had been in a state of confusion. In his mind, he knew that he could triumph and get literally anything he wanted from her, but only his own recent impudence somehow began to seem an unworthy, dirty deed. And imagining what would happen when the girl crossed the threshold of the dacha, Alfred somehow could not in his fantasies to do anything indecent. The most he could imagine was a kiss. And this hesitancy, this stupid modesty, only irritated him more. Then he belatedly still thought about the fact that, as promised then in the library, can tomorrow, theoretically, treat kebabs, pork and carolinade is in the fridge. But nothing now for evening tea. Delicious. There is no such thing. It turned out quite nonsense. He invited the girl of his dreams, but he could not accept her. The dog pulled the leash sharply, thus pulling Alfred out of his thoughts. "No," said the boy. "There are geese grazing there. Let's not go hunting them. Let's go in the grass over there. You little dog." It'll be like a jungle for you. Let's play." But even while having fun with his pet, Alfred couldn't stop the flow of thoughts. Only now they took a different direction. He remembered suddenly how many times his father had grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and said that they were of the same breed and that Alfred was destined to be a thief, a bandit, and that at 6, at 8, at 10 he hated his father like that. He fought him off, shouted that he would never do such abominations as he did. Because of this, his father was furious and threatened that he would teach his son wisdom. And then growing up, Alfred began to realize that many people were not ready to listen to him about who he was in himself. It turned out that many people perceived him as the son of that thief Lawrence from so-and-so's house. Alfred faced the fact that children were forbidden to play with him. He was looked down upon in the local stores as if he were 12 years old and only thinking about stealing something. Mistrust, contempt. Alfred responded to all this at first with muffled resentment, and then came other feelings. Alfred became hostile to the world. He didn't want to be like his father, but he also realized that he was too often seen as a creature in Lawrence's shadow, as an extension of him. Alfred grew up a disobedient child. He realized early on that it was not necessary to ask about his mother. He had enough of one frank conversation with his father, who said that she left him for a new family, in which the husband is also right, and even rich, in which other, normal children have already been born. Alfred, it was enough to realize that it turns out that the mother as if there is no, as if he is an orphan half with a living parent. And then it happened so that Alfred found understanding in the company of guys who were considered the main bullies in the neighborhood. They somehow got together. He was attracted by the fact that these guys do not suspect him of any evil, do not persecute. Yes, they were not the ideal of virtue, real hooligans, but society with them beckoned so that he had no strength to resist. Alfred, however, kept a little to himself, and in many of their scandalous antics did not participate. He was 16 when the leader of the gang said that they didn't need a man who wasn't ready to be on the same page with them. Alfred got sidetracked. Except the rumors about what a scumbag he was didn't go away. They grew like weeds, and now he could not and did not want to fight them. In fact, he decided that it was probably even better. They would be more afraid, so they would be less offended. And for a while it seemed that it was normal to exist like that. But now Alfred wasn't so sure. He was sick to think that he had no other way but to follow the stereotypes that surrounded him. It was impossibly strange, but it was since he begun to get closer to Juliana that he'd been having those thoughts more often. And after the events of that night, Alfred suddenly realized clearly that he could really make his life anything he wanted it to be. He just had to make up his mind and change everything quickly, finally. Despite the fact that the final exams were approaching and free time was reduced to 0, Juliana found an opportunity to work part-time on Sundays. It was a simple job handing out flyers to passersby on the street and paid very little, but it was the very first money earned in the life of a young girl. After calculating the income for 2 weekends, Juliana made a difficult decision. How scary it was! But it was too late to retreat. It seemed to her that forward to the fulfillment of her plans, she was drawn by some unknown force, which is simply impossible to resist. First, Juliana went to the confectionery and chose a cake very small, half a kilo. But as assured her saleswoman at home, delicious, it was honey cake with a layer of black currants. And then she walked into the mall, into a familiar clothing store. Juliana's heart raced as she stopped at the racks, above which plastic letters that folded into the word de estilo oyentes hum invitingly. "Can I get you anything?" Juliana shuddered as the young woman approached her. It was the same slightly familiar Caroline. For the first time in her life, Juliana felt so keenly that she looked wonderful in the old-fashioned chintz dress below the knee, and she felt like a scarecrow. "I'd like to try this on," she said, and pulled the shoulders of the dress. It was a smoky gray knee-high dress made of knitted fabric with a couple of pockets in the front. Juliana chose it because it cost 499 rubles, and she had exactly 500 left after buying the cake. The consultant looked at the dress that the unusual client was wearing, then at the dress on the shoulder pads. "I'm sorry, but may I offer some advice?" She smiled shyly. "These are leftovers from the last collection." And here, stepping back a step, she pointed to 4 mannequins showing brightly colored sundresses made of cotton with floral prints. A new collection, but we just haven't had time to put these particular models on sale yet. If you want, I will now bring your size, the consultant gabbled amiably. One moment, please. Before Julianne could say that she shouldn't worry, the consultant disappeared and then reappeared, carrying 4 sundresses of different colors and in 2 sizes each. And right now, Juliana just didn't have the strength to refuse. Once these marvelous outfits were in her hands, it was as if a witch's spell had fallen on her. In the end, she came out of the fitting room clutching a sundress with large fuchsia flowers to her chest, looked down upon in the local stores as if he were 12 years old and only thinking about stealing something. Mistrust, contempt. Alfred responded to all this at first with muffled resentment, and then came other feelings. Alfred became hostile to the world. He didn't want to be like his father. But he also realized that he was too often seen as a creature in Lawrence's shadow, as an extension of him. Alfred grew up a disobedient child. He realized early on that it was not necessary to ask about his mother. He had enough of one frank conversation with his father, who said that she left him for a new family, in which the husband is also right and even rich, in which other normal children have already been born. Alfred, it was enough to realize that it turns out that the mother, as if he is an orphan half with a living parent. And then it happened so that Alfred found understanding in the company of guys who were considered the main bullies in the neighborhood. They somehow got together. He was attracted by the fact that these guys do not suspect him of any evil, do not persecute. Yes, they were not the ideal of virtue, real hooligans, but society with them beckoned so that he had no strength to resist. Alfred, however, kept a little to himself, and in many of their scandalous antics did not participate. He was 16 when the leader of the gang said that they didn't need a man who wasn't ready to be on the same page with them. Alfred got sidetracked, except the rumors about what a scumbag he was didn't go away. They grew like weeds. And now he could not, and did not want to fight them. In fact, he decided that it was probably even better. They would be more afraid, so they would be less offended. And for a while it seemed that it was normal to exist like that. But now Alfred wasn't so sure. He was sick to think that he had no other way but to follow the stereotypes that surrounded him. It was impossibly strange, but it was since he begun to get closer to Julianne that he'd been having those thoughts more often. And after the events of that night, Alfred suddenly realized clearly that he could really make his life anything he wanted it to be. He just had to make up his mind and change everything quickly finally. Despite the fact that the final exams were approaching and free time was reduced to 0, Julianne found an opportunity to work part-time on Sundays. It was a simple job handing out flyers to passers-by on the street and paid very little, but it was the very first money earned in the life of a young girl. After calculating the income for 2 weekends, Julianne made a difficult decision. How scary it was. But it was too late to retreat. It seemed to her that forward to the fulfillment of her plans, she was drawn by some unknown force, which is simply impossible to resist. First, Juliana went to the confectionery and chose a cake very small, half a kilo. But as assured her saleswoman at home, delicious. It was honey cake with a layer of black currants. And then she walked into the mall, into a familiar clothing store. Julianne's heart raced as she stopped at the racks, above which plastic letters that folded into the word DSCOENTs hum invitingly. "Can I get you anything?" Julianne shuddered as the young woman approached her. It was the same slightly familiar Caroline. For the first time in her life, Julianne felt so keenly that she looked wonderful in the old-fashioned chintz dress below the knee, and she felt like a scarecrow. "I'd like to try this on," she said, and pulled the shoulders of the dress. It was a smoky gray knee-high dress made of knitted fabric with a couple of pockets in the front. Juliana chose it because it cost 499 rubles, and she had exactly 500 left after buying the cake. The consultant looked at the dress that the unusual client was wearing, then at the dress on the shoulder pads. "I'm sorry, but may I offer some advice?" She smiled shyly. "These are leftovers from the last collection." And here, stepping back a step, she pointed to 4 mannequins showing brightly colored sundresses made of cotton with floral prints. "A new collection, but we just haven't had time to put these particular models on sale yet. If you want, I will now bring your size." The consultant gabbled amiably. "One moment, please." Before Julianne could say that she shouldn't worry, The consultant disappeared and then reappeared, carrying 4 sundresses of different colors and in 2 sizes each. And right now, Juliana just didn't have the strength to refuse. Once these marvelous outfits were in her hands, it was as if a witch's spell had fallen on her. In the end, she came out of the fitting room clutching a sundress with large fuchsia flowers to her chest. "It's a great choice. It suits you very well," continued Caroline, who immediately escorted the happy-looking customer to the checkout and there, having sent her partner to the back of the hall to fix her clothes, which had been tumbled around all day, she herself began to calculate the price. "Thank you for helping me choose," Juliana smiled. Her cheeks burned with a feverish blush. "Thank you, Caroline. Always happy to help update the image," smiled the one in return. Julian didn't know that Caroline had already looked at her before approaching her and realized from the fact that she had counted the bills several times that the budget for the outfit was very small. Juliana didn't know that the sundress she had chosen actually cost $2,500 with all the discounts. "So you owed exactly $500, the counselor said with a nonchalant look. Julian was already holding out the money, but her eyes fell on the cash register display, where the real price was displayed, and Caroline had hoped the girl wouldn't notice it. But Julian stammered and looked incomprehensible. "That's the old price. The system malfunctioned." Caroline quickly found it. "That'll be 500 rubles. And seeing that the girl was procrastinating, Caroline herself took the bill from her hands and also slid a rustling bag of clothes toward her across the counter. "Take it, please. And thank you for buying." They exchanged glances, and it was so quick, so piercing, so clear. Julian clutched the package to her as if she couldn't believe in its tangible reality. "Thank you," and she walked out of the store. Before the girl, who was acting as a cashier in the store that day, returned to her seat, Caroline had managed to take out of her pocket a purse that she simply did not risk to leave in the changing room of the shopping center for the staff, and put into the cash register the missing $2,000 for the sold sundress. If in those moments there was someone who would have asked her about the reason for such an act, she would not have been able to clearly answer what moved her, but certainly not ordinary pity. It was just, she decided that it was the right thing to do. It was not the first time Caroline had seen Julian in this store or in the city. They lived on the same street, and even their houses were close window to window. Caroline was not a gossip, but if you did not live a reclusive life, you would learn about many of your neighbors, and especially about those about whom people said that they were strange. This is how Caroline came to know Grandma Leslie and her child from afar, through hearsay. Caroline herself had been raised in a single-parent family by her grandparents. True, not because of orphanhood, just parents were constantly on business trips, then in tourist trips, in general, lived their own, some separate from the native child, a rich life. But Caroline's grandparents were quite modern people, and so for her, Juliana's upbringing seemed wild, but there was nothing to be done. Caroline had long been married for 10 years. It was quite a happy union, and in principle, her husband's income would allow her to exist as a housewife. But when her son Victor went to the 1st grade, Caroline decided that enough of her reclusiveness and got a job in this shopping center, especially since she had always wanted the job to have something to do with clothes. Perhaps Caroline sometimes thought it was somehow passed on from her grandmother, who had worked as a dressmaker for almost 40 years. It was here, in the clothing store, and Caroline had a chance to get to know Julian and her grandmother better. And the visits of an old woman and a teenage girl, who then turned into a young and beautiful girl. The whole store, as they say, was painful to watch, because Leslie, in her characteristic manner, was always reprimanding her granddaughter. "Don't touch it, you'll tear it. No, you're not wearing that shit. No way. It's not for you. Put it back. Don't cry. I spend the money. I decide what you wear." These were the phrases that accompanied their trips to the store for a down jacket, demi-jacket, and other outerwear. A miserable child, another saleswoman once expressed a similar opinion to Carolina's. What will she grow up to be, with a grandmother like that? Caroline shook her head. She didn't know what to say, and she felt guilty for some reason. It seemed that it was impossible to watch her grandmother raising her granddaughter indifferently all these years, keeping her swaddled in a cocoon of strange, frightening, giving off a slight madness of care. That's why Caroline had done that with the sundress. She suddenly realized that it seemed that something special had happened in Juliana's life. Something immeasurably important that moved her to finally break that cocoon. "Grandma," Juliana said, "let's have some tea." When she returned home, the girl hastily stashed her new clothes in her room and went to the kitchen. She put the kettle on, put out the tea pairs from the special ceremonial set, which, according to the established rules, appear on the table only on holidays. And on the calendar, a magnetic bright square marked the most ordinary Sunday. "What's this?" The old woman frowned. "When did you bake this?" "I didn't bake, Grandma." Julian smiled and pushed her chair over. "Hi, Grandma. Don't be angry, okay? I decided not to go for a walk this weekend, not to the theater, not to go to exhibitions, not to the library, but to work a little." And Julian told her mentor about what she had been doing. "I just decided that I'm graduating soon and I need to, at least some experience, how to work to get." Leslie sat down at the table. She looked incredulously at the piece of cake her granddaughter had dropped on her plate. "Grandma, it's all natural, and it's fresh. But, well, you can't always just bake your own cakes. Sometimes you can also." "How much did you make?" "1,000, Julian replied. "How much is the cake?" 500. "Where's the rest of the money?" Julian swallowed hard. "The school asked me to take a job as a prom photographer." She blurted out the first thing that came to mind. And when Granny Ray's faded blue eyes squinted intently, Julian had no doubt in those moments she would be exposed now. But here Leslie nodded. "It used to be customary to ask your elders what to do." "Well, come on. What can I take from you, you foolish girl? And after school, no job. You'll go to school." The old woman finally broke off a piece of cake with a dessert spoon. She brought it to her mouth. The granddaughter held her breath. "That'll do," Leslie said, and didn't say another word during the tea. Then she asked to have her blood pressure taken and laid down on the sofa in front of the TV to watch a documentary about VDNK. The girl was happy that the cake was favorably received. Her grandmother was amazingly nice. The last time Julian had brought a store-bought cake to the hospital, she had thrown it out the window, shouting that she would not poison herself with palm oil. Maybe today's tea party is a sign of good things to come. Julian smiled as she finished the dishes, but then she remembered Alfred again. It seemed like an eternity since that unimaginable incident at the cottage, and in all that time she hadn't seen Alfred. It was as if he had disappeared from her life altogether, vanished into thin air. The only thing she knew was that he had dropped out of school after all. However, this surprised few people there, and the head teacher, not hesitating in expressions, prophesied this bully the most terrible end like his father. Julian did not agree with her and almost spoke out loud, but she held back. It wouldn't have made any difference. Who would believe her that Alfred wasn't really as horrible a person as everyone thought he was? Julian had passed her final exams, and finally the big day of graduation had arrived. The grandmother knew in advance that her granddaughter would wear a dark blue velvet dress, which Juliana's mother once wore to the school graduation. That dress, under a black silk sash, was now hanging on its hangers on the closet door. But yesterday's schoolgirl, going to the main holiday, was now dressing up in front of the mirror, admiring herself in a very different outfit, a sundress with marvelous juicy pink flowers. For the first time, Juliana didn't put her hair in a braid, but instead, having washed it in the evening, twisted it into curls. She didn't have a blowtorch at home, of course, but she used an old folk trick and got the curls with the help of ordinary socks. "Granddaughter, what took you so long, huh? You'll be late." Julian flinched when she heard her grandmother, but the smile didn't disappear from her face. She felt more confident than ever. After another glance at herself in the mirror, she walked resolutely to the door. Leslie staggered backwards, and if she hadn't taken her heart pills that morning, she might have had a second heart attack. Because the granddaughter, what a sight she appeared, as if Rashenka wasn't even her own. "Grandma, I love you very much." The girl intercepted the old woman's hands, gently squeezed the wrinkled hands with her cold fingers. "But in that dress, my mother's dress, I won't go. I bought it for my paycheck. I can't live like this anymore, Grandma. It's not right." And so they stood opposite each other, the old generation and the young, the people most dear to each other. The closest people who sometimes could almost read each other's minds, and at the same time very different, belonging to different worlds. But then Leslie as if died. Her lips and chin trembled. Her eyes darkened. She took her hands away and sighed deeply, full-breasted, exhaled through her teeth. Julian put her hands behind her back and lowered her eyes. "I won't be long, Grandma. I'll just get my diploma, take a picture with the kids in the park, and go home, Grandma." She took a time and stepped toward the door. "I'll go, okay?" "Go," said Leslie, suddenly calm. "And don't be in a hurry. It's such a young thing. Stop." She stopped when the girl opened the door to the landing. Leslie opened the soap box. It was an old ceramic box with roses on the lid. The soap that had been in it almost 100 years ago smelled of roses too. Now it held cash, which was usually used to go to the store for groceries, to pay the light bill, and so on. Determinedly, the old woman shoveled out all the contents of the box, about 3,000, and handed it to her granddaughter. "Here, I remember we didn't give it up for graduation, so give it to whoever needs it. It's not out of favor that they're feeding you. Grandma." "Go already." The old woman interrupted her and waved her arms as if she were chasing away a butterfly that had accidentally flown into the house. "Or you'll be late." Julian left. Leslie returned to the hall and sank down in her favorite chair, her hands on the armrests, and closed her eyes. The clock ticked quietly. Tears rolled down from under the old woman's closed eyelids, but it was a light sadness just somehow came to suddenly realize that everything, the granddaughter grew up. Though I tried to keep her from foolishness, temptations, vices of this world, but apparently people are right. It is impossible to hide it from the youth. And then Leslie dozed off. Her classmates, who saw Juliana in her new clothes, but most importantly in an unusual form, did not immediately recognize who was in front of them. For a while, the merry murmur subsided and all eyes were fixed on the newcomer. Some of the guys whistled, and many girls looked enviously. It turned out that the odd girl had a gorgeous figure, and her hair, usually hidden in tight braids, was now curling in lush, silky curls. "Julian," Headmaster Barry approached the girl. "You're great. He spread his hands. "I wouldn't be lying if I said I've never seen a more beautiful senior in my life." Much later, looking back on this day, Juliana understood that his bright events merged in the end into one long action, like multicolored glasses of a kaleidoscope are put together in one pattern. But this applied to the day exactly until the moment when, after a walk in the park, sitting in a cafe and general photographing, she was suddenly called by a familiar voice. The sun was already setting. Its fiery golden rays penetrated the green of the trees and still blinded her. So Juliana squinted her eyes, and the silhouette of the guy standing nearby turned out to be quite blurred. "Alfred," she said in disbelief. The other seniors didn't even notice her slipping away, their first impressions having dissipated, and they were more interested in each other's company, leaving the strange-looking roommate to her own devices, as in previous years. Alfred stood at the entrance to the park. Alfred was standing at the entrance to the park, again in tattered jeans, but his jacket was a new brownish-red one that fit. "Congratulations," he said and smiled. "You dropped out of school after all," she said reproachfully. But that wasn't what she'd meant to say when she was almost running toward him. "I've been busy, selling the apartment and the cottage." He glanced down and back, smirking. "And you're a pretty girl, it turns out." "Okay, I won't distract you." I nodded at the group of school children in the distance. "I'm not with them," Julian replied. "I guess I don't fit in with society after all." "You don't need that," Alfred said. "You'll find other people you'll be comfortable with." It was a strange word and phrase for him in general. Julian squinted her eyes. "So you decided to leave after all?" "I need to find my place somewhere." "Okay." He was obviously going to say something else, but he stifled himself and took a step back. "Have a nice day." Julian didn't have time to say what she wanted to say, that they needed to talk, that he wasn't all alone, that she had to understand, she had to find out how to help him in. But all these thoughts were swarming in her mind. She couldn't put it all out coherently right now. She could only stare at him. How she needed him to take a tiny step toward her. Just the tiniest bit. But he sent her a freezing stare instead, his face contorted hard, and he turned and simply ran. And at the same time, it seemed that he was not just rushing to the bus. He was running away from her and from the conversation that could take place between them. The figures of swans surrounded by live snow-white hyacinths with flecks of candy-pink eustoma were beautiful. And if the organizer of this wedding celebration was asked to name the most successful element of the banquet hall decoration, she would have pointed to these ice sculptures. Rhythmically tapping a mini pen on the page of the notebook, the entries in which were so small and abbreviated that only their creator could decipher it, the girl looked at her creation. Splendid. Thanks to this order, she would finally close the mortgage for the apartment, and after it, perhaps she could treat herself to a vacation, which she hadn't been on for the past 2 years. With a satisfied sigh and a nod to her own thoughts, Julian returned the writing utensils to the pocket of the immaculately tailored smoky gray jacket that went with the pencil skirt and silk blouse in a soft lavender shade. Stylish, but not overly dressy, because she, after all, is a responsible person here and in no way should not compete with the bride or even the guests. "Guys, this way," came a voice from behind us as the doors opened. Julian rounded her eyes as some workers with a stepladder and some other guy in a black suit entered the room. "Over there," the guy stretched out, pointing his hand at the wall. More precisely, on that part of it, which was located behind the seats for the young and was generously draped with silk and brocade, the folds of which were supported by golden figures of cupids. "Hey, what are you doing?" The girl stomped indignantly toward the intruders. "Don't you dare touch anything." The workers stopped and turned to the supervisors and the supervisors to her. "Security," the tall brunette threw and stuck his thumbs behind the belt of his pants and smirked. "That came out extremely cheeky. We are working. Please do not interfere." "Stay out of it." Julian burst out indignantly. "Do you know how long we've been laying this up? What do you think you're doing here? Why didn't I do anything?" And then she stopped talking because the young man's face seemed familiar. Alfred? Apparently, mutual recognition came to them synchronously. "Julian," he said, "what are you doing here?" "A wedding," she replied simply and quite matter-of-factly. "What are you doing here?" "Working too," he replied. "So what should we do?" one of the workers asked. "Wait a minute." Alfred waved him away and focused his attention back on the young woman in front of him. He remembered her. All those years he'd been picking up the pieces of his life. And she remembered him, too often than she would have liked, much more often than she should have remembered a guy she knew from school, not even a classmate, whose close acquaintance had taken place under not the most romantic circumstances. But that was the past, and now they exchanged a few more phrases, and it turned out that Alfred is the head of security of the father of the bride, Bruce, a complicated man, a businessman, and even an oligarch. Alfred had spent almost all these years in other lands and then, having built up a solid reputation in the security field, decided to return to the city, which he still considered the most native place. And it was here that he eventually found his best job. "I never would have guessed," Julian said frankly, when Alfred informed her what he was doing. "Of course, with my pedigree and track record," he replied, and it was not clear whether he was really offended or was being kindly ironic about himself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Julian was immediately taken aback. It was normal, so familiar, as if all those years apart hadn't happened. Alfred grinned. "And you create all this?" He circled the surrounding space with his hand. "Cute, but of course terribly girlish, if you know what I mean." "Not at all." Julian was always very sensitive, on the verge of being painful, to criticism of her creations. She could speak calmly about anything and everything only directly to her clients, but the rest of us would be better to hold our tongues. Julian herself often regretted her temper, but found the reason for it. Apparently, it was hereditary from her grandmother's temper. The decoration is created taking into account the tastes and wishes of the bride and groom. "Our agency is focused on the current global trends in wedding fashion," said the girl. "Wait a minute," bowed Alfred's head. "Ours. Are you married and doing business with your husband? Do you think that's the only way to do it?" Julian frowned again. "No, just like that," he thought, scratching at the back of his head with a familiar gesture. "I'm not married." "Wonderful. What do you mean?" "Oh, never mind. So you started an agency with someone and you do weddings?" "Mostly them. But we also do wedding anniversaries, engagement parties." "Do you celebrate divorces?" "No. Julian had fallen into such a strange state of mind from the conversation with Alfred that she even missed the trill of her work phone. The girl carried two miniature smartphones, the second one containing only personal contacts. And before, such neglect of her professional duties was not peculiar to her. Who would ever think of celebrating a divorce? I don't know, he shrugged. I was celebrating. I went to the sea for 2 weeks, just lying on the sand and matured. To go on, well, to live. And I asked about you, well, I thought that if you like weddings so much, you should probably be married already, maybe even more than once. Why is that? To the first impressions of delight, surprise, and even heart palpitations, a familiar irritation began to set in. It's just déjà vu. So it is a wedding. How many different weddings can be played? Having the opportunity and imagination. Alfred spoke absolutely serious tone, but his eyes laughed. I'm not married. I haven't been yet, Julian replied, nervously fixing her already perfect hair, which was now a bob. So what do you need to do here? The cameras have lost the image of the auditorium. You must have covered it up with your fancy trinkets. So put the cameras somewhere else. It's got the perfect viewing angle. It's not my problem. The design has already been thought out, and it is impossible to change it. Who cares where the bows are? This is about safety. What? Are you afraid the bride will be stolen? Don't worry, it's not in the script. I don't know. Alfred was suddenly close, just dangerously close, literally hovering over her with his whole weight. Julian thought, inappropriately, that he'd gotten noticeably bigger or broader in the shoulders. It's been 10 years, Alfred said. You haven't changed at all. But very much so, the girl felt awkward, and for some reason she was sure that the traitorous blush was well visible, despite the foundation, blush, and powder. So what to do? Couldn't stand it. One of the workers, who had a bunch of other things planned for the day. Julian and Alfred backed away, just bounced away from each other like a flock of birds scattering. And soon, with Julian's instruction, the textile decor was moved so that it would not block the CCTV cameras. Well, now everything is ready, the girl said smugly, and Alfred visibly revived. So can we talk? Julian wanted to say that she was terribly busy, but that wouldn't be true. And besides, she wanted to talk to the man who had made her heart beat so strangely often all these years. There were still a few hours before the wedding reception at the bride's father's mansion, and Alfred and Julian had agreed to sit on the back porch for a while. It was the quietest place right now. They sat down directly on the steps. In front of them stretched out as if wild, but in fact skillfully cultivated garden in the English style. Juliana told about how after 2 courses at the university to study philology, she realized that it was absolutely not her business and dropped out, deciding to take a big risk just to make a living for a while, as it turns out, and in parallel to look for themselves. In the end, it turned out that she liked to create holidays, and 5 years ago she and Caroline created a small agency, which by now has become one of the leading in the city. Caroline. Alfred was surprised. The one whose husband is an electrician. They also have Victor's son. I remember her. She always treated me differently, he added and averted his eyes. Not like the others. I know, Julian nodded. She and I were talking about you the other day, and she told me all about it, that you weren't a monster at all. And when again, did you think I was a monster? He squinted his eyes as if with resentment. When you invited me to the cottage, I swear, Julian smiled. It was the most nightmarish date of my life. And mine. I'd give anything to have it any other way. And anyway, what an idiot I was. I should have just asked her out in a normal way to a movie, for example. I shouldn't have been afraid that you'd say no. Understandably, the girl nervously tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The conversation somehow suddenly turned into a direction that was not the most convenient for free conversation. How's Grandma? Asked Alfred. She's fine. I'm amazed at her age, and she's still going strong. Her health, of course, sometimes fails her. But in terms of fortitude, she's enough for 10 people. You know, I've only recently been able to understand her. It seemed to me then, when I had just finished school, that I had escaped from a nightmare. And then, I was able to realize that she just loved me very much and thought to protect me that way. I talked to the doctor. My grandmother is seeing a psychologist, Julian explained, and she agreed to go to him to find out why she was having bad dreams. And then he got her talking, and then it's easier for us to live together. Anyway, the psychologist doesn't want to scare her, but he said it's like she had an obsession. Good thing she stopped in time. You know, sometimes I feel so guilty for leaving Grandma alone for so long. But I got her a nurse. She's a very decent woman. She takes good care of her. And now she doesn't need anything. The girl smoothed her skirt on her knees, looked at Alfred carefully, catching his gaze. How long have you been divorced? Last year. I told you we didn't see eye to eye. I guess I'm just not a good person. Somehow I thought you changed since then, and not for the worse. So I don't think you're a bad person. Alfred, what about your mother? She said carefully. Do you know what's wrong with her? I mean, have you ever thought about? I found her, Alfred answered, and it seemed that he was ready to answer frankly to this question, but only wanted to get off as soon as possible. We talked. Calmly, peacefully. She apologized and told me not to come back. She really has a whole other life. There's no place for me there, but I forgave her. That's it. Juliana was silent. They just sat side by side and watched the wind move the tall, lush grasses and the flowers among them. I've forgotten, Juliana exclaimed. Master, 10 years is a long time for a dog, but he's fine. Alfred grinned. He lives here with me. He's in the enclosure now. Do you want to say hello? He stood up and offered his hand to the girl. I do. She rose, accepting the outstretched palm. Do you want to bet? Alfred rounded his eyes. He hadn't expected this at all. Conditions? The master will recognize me immediately, and then you'll give me a personal tour of the place. Tell me what the security service does. I only know from movies you walk around and talk to someone on the radio all the time, right? Almost, Alfred replied. And if you lose? Then you can take a chance and ask me out. The young man grinned. It was a very tempting offer, and whatever the outcome of the bet, he somehow had no doubt that the date would happen, and it would be very easy to turn the excursion into one. And Alfred also thought that perhaps now he had to become a really good guy. It was necessary to become a good husband for Juliana.
Elizabeth was often alone at home. She was so tired of it that she wanted someone to be there for her. Her mother was always at the office. She worked as a bookkeeper for the village council, so she often stayed there late. Maybe, are you asleep? A woman came into the house. No, she came out of her room. Let's have dinner then. She set the groceries from her bag on the table. Okay, why are you taking so long again today? Elizabeth yawned. Look, I've yet paid a salary for this. I need to make sure there are no mistakes. The woman didn't like the subject. Good, her daughter agreed with her. They ate and then went to bed. In the morning, the girl had to go to school and her mother had to get up for work again. Hi, Arnold met her on the road. Hello, Elizabeth liked him. How's it going? He picked up the girl's briefcase. Normal, she blushed. Shall we go out tonight? He asked simply. Okay, they're already approaching the school porch. Well, what did he say to you? Katie's best friend came up to her. Nothing, that one was still staring at the guy's back. Well, Elizabeth, Tony, it was interesting. It's okay that we're going out tonight, the girl admitted. Did you say yes? Katie was sure that Elizabeth was going to torture him for a long time. Yeah, as long as I can. School will be over soon. He'll take off and leave, and I'll be left with my pride. She was sure of it. Look at you, anyone would take you. My friend was sure of it. Thank you for the compliment, of course, but I wish it was Arnold. She blushed again. They went to class. The lessons began, but Elizabeth did not care about them. She thought only about the young man. Classes dragged slowly. It was boring. Finally, everything was over. The girl went out into the schoolyard, but Arnold was not there. Waiting? Katie caught up with her. Leave me alone, eh? Elizabeth couldn't stand her friend's teasing any longer. She went home, had lunch, and decided to do her homework. She couldn't think of anything to do, and she looked out the window every now and then. When it was 6 o'clock in the evening, he came in. At first, Elizabeth wanted to run out to meet him, but after a moment, she thought it would be rash. She sat back in her chair. There was a knock on the window. Elizabeth looked out, smiled, and shook her head, indicating that she was about to come out. Hi, he grinned from ear to ear. Why so happy? She was shy, but she spoke confidently. He saw you. He didn't hide the fact that he liked the girl. "Let's go," she smiled and tugged his hand. They went to the bank of the river, which was a favorite place for young people. But Arnold and Elizabeth didn't want anyone to see them, so they decided to go further, to a fisherman's cottage, which had been abandoned for a long time. "Come here," he gave her a hand to keep her from falling through on the bridge, where the boards were already rotten. "Thank you." She jumped to the ground and fell right into his arms. Now he went to the door and tried to open it, but nothing worked. Then Arnold took a piece of iron that was lying on the ground, slipped it under the boards, pounded on it, and the door failed. "Wow," was all Elizabeth could say. They went inside. The place smelled musty. There were old nets around, some rags, some mattress. "Come here," the boy beckoned her. They laid the mattress against the wall, threw some other stuff on it, and made themselves comfortable. There was a small window opposite where they were sitting, with a view of some of the trees and the sky. Beautifully, Elizabeth sat in Arnold's arms. "Like you," he whispered it in her ear. "What?" She laughed and turned to him. "You're beautiful." He touched her hair, which was disheveled from its ponytail. Their faces were very close together, and Arnold couldn't resist. He kissed Elizabeth. "You what?" She recoiled from him, blushing. "I love you." He held her hands. "What are you talking about? What kind of love can there be at our age?" She said it, and she didn't want him to let her go. "Come to me." He pulled her to his chest again. She could smell him. She liked him. Arnold stroked her head, her back, her neck. They were pleasant touches. "I'll never leave you," he whispered to her. "I love you," she answered him. They lay like that on the old mattress for a long time, Arnold holding her and Elizabeth drowning in that embrace. "Time to go home." He kissed her. "Yes." She stood up, shook it off, looked at him and smiled. They left the cabin, closed the door so that it would appear that this was the way it was. Arnold walked with Elizabeth to her house. From now, he stepped close to her and set it into her hair. "Arnold," she hugged him. "Yes, missed you very much. Can't wait to get together." Elizabeth wanted to go shopping for a doll for her daughter and then go. "Come on, see you later." They hugged. There were a lot of people in the store. Everyone wanted to please children on this fabulous holiday. "I'm sorry." Elizabeth felt like she'd stepped on someone's foot. "Just shine today." The man looked down at his shoes. "I didn't do it on purpose." Elizabeth really didn't mean it. She pulled a handkerchief out of her pocket, wanting to remove her mark from the victim's shoes. "You what?" He grabbed her arm. "Sorry again. Couldn't find any other words, girl." "Come on." He took her to where there were the least people. Why? She didn't understand what this man wanted from her. Now he sat down, dusted his boots a couple times with some kind of rag, and everything was as it had been before. "I should probably go." Elizabeth looked to see that there weren't as many customers at the register. "Wait, I'm with you." He rose. "Okay." She's already headed that way. "My name is Michael. What's yours?" Elizabeth heard from behind her. "Elizabeth," she didn't turn around at that. "Buying a doll for your sister?" He pointed at the beautiful toy in the girl's hands. "To my daughter, waiting for me for the holidays at Grandma's." She didn't mince words. "Wow." Michael didn't continue. He was also buying something. And when he went outside, he saw that Elizaveta had crossed to the other side. He caught up with her. "Can I walk you out?" He walked beside me. "I think you're already doing that." She smiled. Elizabeth thought to herself, how could you just step on a man's foot in the store, and the next moment you had already made an acquaintance? She liked Michael. He was solid, in a coat, with a briefcase and an umbrella. "Yeah, are you going somewhere?" He looked at the large bag in her hand. "Yes, I live in the village, and now I am studying here. For the holidays I decided to visit my mother and daughter." Elizabeth spoke casually. "Let me help you." He held out his hand to take the bag. "Thank you." She really was grateful because the luggage was heavy. They reached the train station, stopped. "Elizabeth, will we meet again?" "You'd like that very much." "Why not?" She saw her bus pulling up. "Then tell me where you live in the city. I'll be sure to come." He looked in the same direction she did. "Yes." She nodded and dictated the address to him. Before we met, he stood looking at her through the bus window. "Bye," the girl said with just her lips. On the road, she looked at the flickering trees, but did not see them, thinking about her new acquaintance. Finally, the familiar outlines of houses appeared ahead. A smile appeared on the girl's face. She imagined how Mehdi would meet her now. She got off the bus and headed towards her house. Everything was familiar here. Elizabeth greeted the locals along the way. She was already at her gate when she saw Arnold. "Hi," he approached her. "What are you doing here?" She didn't want to talk to this man. Wanting to ask how he was doing, the girl could see he wasn't sober. She pushed him away a little and walked through the gate. He didn't dare follow her. "Daughter, hello," a woman came out on the porch. "Why did you come to meet me on purpose?" Elizaveta couldn't understand. "No, I thought your ex-husband was gonna bang again." She pointed to the gate. Wasn't this the first time? The girl was very surprised why no one had told her this before. "Yes, sorry I didn't tell you." The mother walked into the house, waiting for her daughter to catch up with her. And what he needed here, different thoughts about the baby and everything else, immediately began to pop into his head. Nothing, a drink or money for a bottle. She heard the answer to her question. Wow, Elizabeth stood up and froze. There was no telling how long she would stand like that and what she would think about. "Mom," there was a hurricane coming at her from the room. "Maddie, hey," she hugged her. "Why were you gone so long?" The girl clung to her mother's neck with a deadly grip. "I'm sorry, love, but we'll be together soon." She knew for sure we would be. "Okay, granddaughter, let mommy pass," took her in her grandmother's arms. "I missed you so much." Elizabeth looked at her mother. "Yes, let's go to the table." They all sat there together. "Well, are you ready for the holiday?" Elizabeth leaned over to the child. "No, we don't even have a Christmas tree," the little girl said sadly. "It's okay, we'll find her today." Her mom kissed her. Yay, started bouncing around the kitchen. As Elizabeth had promised, she bought a small Christmas tree. They set it up in the room, decorated it with toys, and now the holiday felt real. And the presents? The girl looked under the tree. "Wait, Santa Claus hasn't made it to our house yet," Elizabeth laughed. At night, she prepared everything, packed it all nicely, and tomorrow, as soon as they sat down at the table, she would put it all under the festive tree. Everything went as Elizabeth had planned. Her daughter was so happy with the doll that she did not sit at the table at all. And when the women came into the room, they only smiled when they saw her sleeping with the new toy in her arms. "So, how are things going in town?" the woman asked, so they could talk to each other at last. It was okay. There really wasn't much to tell. She didn't want to talk about the last encounter because nothing was clear. They raised their glasses, congratulated each other, and drank. After the party, they put the dishes away and went to their room. "Well, it's time for me to go back to school. Elizabeth has been home for a week." "May all be well." Mother and daughter hugged her. "I'm going to miss you very, very much," cried the girl. Just like me, Elizabeth didn't want to cry, but a single tear slid treacherously down her cheek. That was it. Her mother took her by the hand and went to walk her to the gate. "Bye," headed the girl towards the station. Everything in the dormitory was the same as before. Nothing had changed in the week they hadn't been there. They had to start studying again. "Elizabeth, there's someone there to see you." One of the female students came into her room. "Thank you." She speculated who it might be. When the girl came downstairs, she saw Michael, as she expected. Today he was wearing a tracksuit, which was very suitable for a young man. Yes, young. It was the first time Elizabeth had seen him in an overcoat and thought he was a man. "Hi," she approached him. He couldn't wait for all these celebrations to be over. He looked up. The janitor was standing there watching them. He gave Elizabeth a hand and looked at the exit. The girl immediately understood everything. She said that she had to change, and in a minute she would be outside. And so it was agreed. "Where are you going?" Victoria stood looking at her. Elizaveta didn't usually leave the dormitory at all. "I'll tell you all about it later," the roommate said, embarrassed. She grabbed her jacket, put on her shoes, and went out into the hallway. Michael stood on the porch. "Okay, I'm ready." She walked over to him. "I'm very happy about that." He looked her over from head to toe. They walked just down the street, and when they reached a bench that stood in the shade of a tree, they decided to sit down and talk. "I can't explain it, but there in the store, when you stepped on my foot, I liked you right away," Michael began to say. "Of course, I can't say that. I was very scared at the time." She didn't look at him, but later, "I can say that she paid attention to you two." They sat there like two schoolboys who couldn't admit their feelings to each other. On the one hand, it was funny, but on the other hand, it was only the second time they had seen each other. "Can we go to the movies tomorrow?" he asked her. "All right, Elizabeth, something to think about." "How long have you been a student here?" He wanted to know more about her. 6 months. For some reason, she felt ashamed of that answer. Why do you answer like that? He couldn't understand. Many people in my group say I'm a late entrant, but I think it's never too late to learn. Elizabeth pulled some wrappers out of her pocket and fiddled with them. Why do you even think about it? When you got in, then you got in. Maybe you didn't get the education you wanted, and now you're retraining. He didn't understand what the problem was. They chatted some more, walked around the city, and Michael went to see her off, because Elizabeth said she still had some studying to do. Don't forget the movie, he told her on the porch. Sure enough, she walked into the dorm, cheeks burning, up to her room. Tell me, were you on a date? Victoria sat down to her at once. Yes, on a date, she told her cryptically. So, who is he? Where did you meet him? The roommate was all interested. Elizabeth told her how they had run into each other in the store, and after that, Michael had already recognized her. Well, wow, as it happens, some people go to bars, restaurants, clubs, cannot meet anyone, and you just stepped on his foot in the store, she laughed. Oh, Victoria, don't be silly, nothing is known yet. Elizabeth didn't want to rush things. Michael came every day, it was very pleasant. He was clever, and Elizabeth liked to talk to him about different topics. When the heat came, the girl planned to go to her village again, because there were long holidays ahead. Are you sure you don't want to take me with you? Michael asked her. Do you really want it? She didn't know what to do or how to be. You know, I'm the kind of person who, if I do something, I do it thoroughly. If I choose you, I want to do it once, and for life. He took her hands in his, turning her to face him. So you want to go to my village now to meet my mom, she concluded. How clever you are, he kissed her. Okay, let's go, they've arranged for tomorrow where they'll meet. Elizabeth was very worried. What are you so worried about? Victoria asked her tonight. It's not every day you bring your fiancé and mom to meet, she said. So what's the big deal? You know, he's nice. Or what are you worried about? My friend didn't understand. How will Marty take all this? Elizabeth sighed. Yes, she'll take it all normally. The man is adequate. The girl should like him. Let him buy her candy. That's all it takes, Victoria advised. Well, your words to God. Elizabeth adjusted the pillow and lay down. Sleep couldn't come for a long time because there were different thoughts in her head. But eventually she fell asleep in the morning. She went to her classes, and after them, she could go to the train station. Elizabeth saw from afar that Michael was already sitting there, waiting for her. Various thoughts came into her head again. How she would bring him to the village, what she would tell her mother, because she had never told about any young men, and now immediately the groom came. But since it was already decided, it had to be done. Here I am, she approached him from behind. And I'm waiting for you. He stood up and put his arm around her. So are you really ready to go to my mom's? She asked him that question again. Of course, why do you ask every time? He couldn't understand. They got on the bus, drove off, talked a lot on the way. Elizabeth showed him different places where she had been, beautiful views of the river. She promised him that when everything blooms, you'll see how beautiful it will be. They were pulling into the station when Elizabeth noticed Marty, and for some reason she got even more excited. Just as they were getting off the bus, Michael heard her. Mommy, Mommy, the little girl ran to her. Hi, honey, she sat down and hugged her daughter. How are you here? Grandmother said that there are long holidays ahead and you'll probably come to us, so we came to meet you, the girl gibbered. Suddenly she stopped and shifted her gaze to Michael. Meet Michael, this is Michael, her mom told her. Hi, Uncle Michael, she extended her hand to him. Hi, he told her and pulled a candy bar out of his pocket. Oh, thank you, I just love those, she said. All this time Elizabeth's mother stood aside and watched the scene. Of course, she did not interfere in her daughter's affairs, deciding that later, when there was time, they would talk privately. Michael, I'd like you to meet my mom, she motioned him over to the woman. Please, he extended his hand to her. Me too, she shook it. After that, everyone went home. It was so peaceful for some reason. Juliet, I'm here for a reason, Michael said that evening as they gathered around the table. I've already realized that. The woman glanced at her daughter. I like Elizabeth very much, and I would like her to be my wife. He reached into his inner pocket and took out a ring. Wow, and silent, Elizabeth stared at the gift. Is Uncle Michael gonna be my daddy? Running around Marty. Anything is possible. Elizabeth slipped the ring on her finger. They sat there. The mother put her hand on her head, sat there, watching, seeing how happy her daughter was. Then she left them at home and went to a friend's house. "You have a good mom," Michael told Elizabeth. Yes, she put the girl on her lap. "So, baby, shall we get to know each other?" He tickled her. "Yes," laughed the one. This time the couple could stay here for only 3 days. After that, Elizaveta had to go to school and Vazia to work. "Matey, now your mother's vacation will come, and we will surely come for you." The young man crouched down in front of her. "Yeah, and I get to live with you." She was glad for something that hadn't happened yet. Yes, he raised his eyes to Elizabeth. That's how it worked out. When the girl passed the last exam, they went together again to pick up their daughter. The mother was so much upset. After all, when Elizaveta went to study, she had to quit her job. And now they were leaving her alone. "Don't feel bad. You can always come visit us. Hot your daughter?" Good. Her mother knew she was sure to visit them many more times. Michael moved Elizabeth back to his place, and they brought Maddie there too. Now they had a full-fledged family. All that was left was to get their passports stamped. "Are you happy?" Michael asked her when they had been together for a month. "Very much so," she hugged him. Time flew by quickly. Elizabeth finished her studies, got a job. Maddie went to kindergarten. Michael and Elizabeth were happy that they had such a beautiful daughter. Yes, a daughter, because Maddie almost immediately started calling Michael Daddy. He didn't mind it, but he didn't give up hope that they would have a child together. "Today is an important day," my father said as he put on his suit in the morning. "My place or yours?" Maddie was getting the hang of it. "Of course you have, but it's not so easy for us either." He sat down in front of his daughter, adjusted her jacket, helped her put on her briefcase. "That's it, let's go." Elizabeth joined them. In her hands was a huge bouquet that consisted of asters and gladioli. They were going to the line, which was the first in the girl's life. Elizabeth was a little worried, and Maddie, on the contrary, was interested in everything. School life is not easy, but it concerns not only children, but also their parents. "How are things going at work?" Michael asked his wife. "It's fine. Why do you ask?" She was making pies in the kitchen. "You look tired." He helped make the stuffing. "No, it was okay. It was just a lot of hassle with Maddie, and it was true. The kids had so much to do at school that their mother couldn't keep up with everything." "Why didn't you say anything? I can help." He was willing to do anything to make the family happy. Then see today what they are doing there. The girl was already in the 4th grade. She was bright, but still did not understand a lot. Only after a deep understanding of the topic she did everything correctly. Good. It was mutual in their family, each helping the other. "Matey, get up. You'll be late for the dance," her mother shouted from the kitchen. "Can I not go today?" The girl was in 7th grade. She used to go everywhere without reservation. Now she started to be stubborn. "No, it won't work like that, like going out with your girlfriends. Then you are always ready. Here too you have to try." Elizabeth walked into the room and looked at her daughter. "Okay." Reluctantly she got up. "There? That's better," went the mom, giving her daughter time to change. Maddie was going to the dance class, which she had grown tired of. She'd been going since 1st grade, and now that everyone was older, she didn't want to waste any more time on it. "Maddie, where are you going?" Her friends greeted her. "To the dance." She rolled her eyes. "Let's go for a walk." "Why do you need them?" they urged her. "Ah, okay, it's okay to skip once." She looked around as if she was afraid her mother was watching her. They gathered in one of the courtyards because there was also a group of older guys there. They didn't pay attention to the girls, but they still came to them every day. "Hi," walked Maddie and her friends past the young men. Yeah, they didn't even turn around. They weren't interested in the little ones. "Why don't they even look in our direction?" asked Stasha, who liked Pierce. "Because they have other interests," Maddie answered her. The girls didn't waste the opportunity. They were in that yard every day. "Come here." Arthur beckoned to Maddie. "What?" She didn't expect to be called. The school year was almost at an end, with only a few days left until vacation. "Go on. Come on," her girlfriends whispered to her. Leave that if their girlfriends started hanging out with a guy like that, they might get lucky too. "Hi," she approached him. "What were you standing there so long with him?" He asked about his friends. "Talking about you," she told him honestly. A boy and a girl began a serious relationship. Now they rarely sat in this courtyard as a group. More often Artur came to pick up Maddie, and they went for walks. "Who's that guy visiting you?" her mother asked her once. "His name is Arthur. We've been friends for a couple months now." She blushed as she mentioned this to her mother. "Why don't you bring him to visit? Introduce him?" The woman was afraid because the guy was 5 years older. I don't know, it's not time yet, she shrugged. Why are you picking on her? Michael intervened in their conversation. Well, how come? I'm a mother. I need to know who my daughter is socializing with. Elizabeth didn't understand him. Your daughter is 13 until she's old enough to choose her own suitors. We'll change them more than once, laughed Michael. It's good for you to reason. You don't worry like I do, she sighed. Now Elizabeth began to watch her daughter more carefully. She was afraid that a grown-up boy could do something. But Arthur showed himself on the good side. The girl always came home on time. At school she studied well, and so, after some time, Elizabeth let go of this situation. At school there was an autumn ball, and of course after a disco. Will you come? Mady asked Arthur. You're inviting me. I didn't feel like going to school, but if his girl's going, he should be with her. When they got there in the evening, they saw that the girl with who the boy had once been friends was also there. Maddie was dancing in a circle with her friends, and suddenly she felt someone pushing her back. She turned around and saw Nadia, Arthur's ex. What do you want? She asked her. And there's nothing to look at other people's boyfriends, much less be friends with them, she replied. You broke up. We started being friends. What's the big deal? Maddie didn't understand. We didn't break up. I just wanted to teach him a lesson, and you see how it turned out, the girl said haughtily. Well, who did you teach a lesson to? Yourself, laughed Mady. Things were getting so heated between them that things were heading for a fight. Fuck you, she said to Nadia, and pushed at her shoulder. She grabbed her by the hair, and a real scuffle broke out. Nadia's friends wanted to protect her friend, but the girls who were with Maddie didn't stand still either. Arthur stood aside and only smiled at that. The whole situation was funny. After the teachers who were on duty at the disco had separated them, Maddie approached Arthur. Are you laughing? She asked him. Uh-huh, he replied. Yeah, and fuck you. She turned around and headed for the exit. Wait, he followed her, but Maddie didn't want to listen to him. She was shaking with anger, not at the fact that she'd just gotten into a fight, but at having to fight over some guy. She'd never been down like this before. At home, she let the tears flow. Daughter, what's wrong? Mom ran into the room. Nothing, please leave me alone, she begged. The girl walked, her legs beginning to shake. Arthur was only a few meters away, but it seemed to her that he was miles away from her. When finally Maddie was close by, the boy laughed. Did you call me here to laugh? She didn't understand, and somehow her courage came at once. No, it's just you're shaking like a leaf, he took her hand. I can't help it, Maddie was telling the truth. Okay, let's go. There's business to attend to. He beckoned her over to the others. Hey, she came over. Listen, without greeting the guy started talking, we need you to come to the disco with us. Why? The girl realized they had some kind of plan. Our girls decided that we couldn't find anyone else. They blew us off, so we'll show them that we don't care, they explained to her. She turned to her friends and waved for them to come over to her. They were just waiting for that. They were there at the same moment. Maddie recounted the story to them. We agree, those have already imagined that they will come to the disco with them, how their classmates will be jealous. Then it's settled. We'll see you here on Saturday. Arthur looked at Maddie and smiled. She must have fallen in love with him at that very moment. Mady, I found out you've been skipping the dance. Her mother came to her room. Did your teacher call you? The girl didn't understand. There is one class left before the end of the year. At least go to it, the woman requested. And I won't go from September. She asked the woman. We'll see, Elizabeth quipped. On Saturday, the girls had been at Maddie's house practically since lunchtime. They were putting on makeup, picking out what to wear. Man, it doesn't seem too bright, turned to her friends Maddie. No, it was fine. They approved of what she did. But the girls still cleaned up a little of the makeup with wipes. Finally, they were ready. It was still more than 2 hours before the event started, so everyone gathered in the same courtyard. Hi, the guys finally came. Now they were chatting like old friends. Let's go. Mady glanced at Arthur. Yep, he smiled at her. Maddie walked up to him and took him under her arm. It was very cool for her. Arthur was in charge of the company, and now she was walking beside him. Why so much makeup? The guy asked on the way out. Yeah, I knew it. She regretted not cleaning as much as she wanted. Listened to her friends. Ahead showed the decay, where the disco was held. My knees began to tremble. What if your girls start fighting with us? Mady asked. for some reason that had just occurred to her. They won't, and if they do, we're always there for them, he answered her. Good. She believed Arthur could handle everything. That night was just as the guys had planned. Those girls were only a year older than Maddie and her friends. As soon as they saw that they had come with their friends, they started talking. When Maddie went outside, they hurried to be there too. You're aware they're ours, one of the girls said. It was yours, now it's ours, Maddie didn't hesitate to say. They bickered some more and then went back into the hall. A slow dance began. Arthur approached Maddie, and they danced, her eyes glittering as she saw the rival's eyes glaze over. Let's get out of here, the guy called out to her. What about the girls? She looked at her friends. Not little ones, they'll get there on their own. He looked to the same place as the girl. Okay, choosing between the girls and the guys, she favored him. They went outside, it was warm. Maddie took the boy's arm again, and they headed toward where the market had been during the day. Let's sit here, he beckoned her over to the tray and stood across from her himself. Good, she liked the way he treated her. You're cool, he touched her. You too, she smiled, she felt good now. What if we start being friends? He suggested. Come on, she couldn't believe she was saying that. Come on, I'll walk you out now, and tomorrow come to the yard. He gave her a hand to help her get down from where she was sitting. The next day, as promised, he was waiting for her where they always met. Maddie, are you really dating? Her friends looked at her in surprise. Yes, he suggested it himself yesterday, she told them. She looked down on them as if she was looking down on them. All right, I'm gonna go. Maddie headed in Arthur's direction. The girls kept up. No, I want to know why my daughter is crying. She crouched on the edge of the bed. He turned out to be just like everyone else, cried the girl. Calm down, there's no reason to suffer over them like that, stroked her head the woman. Mom, you don't understand. Nothing could help her that night. Her mother brought her some more milk, which she drank and went to bed. She went to school in the morning, then came home, and never went out again. She really didn't want to see Arthur, but when she didn't come to the yard, the guy thought he should go to her himself. He knocked on the door, waited a long time to be opened. Elizabeth appeared on the threshold. Hello, can I talk to Maddie? He asked her. No, the mother replied. Why? He didn't understand. You hurt her badly yesterday and she doesn't want to communicate with you today, the woman said. Since I had hurt her, just didn't want to get involved in their fight, and that was it. He looked inside the apartment, but didn't see Maddie there. She said you broke up. The woman was looking for something in her bag. Just call her and that's it, the young man insisted. Okay. She went to the room where Maddie was, told her everything. The girl went out onto the landing, closing the door behind her. Why are you doing this? Arthur asked her. That's it, you can go to your Nadia. You and I are no longer together, she answered him. It was sad to hear, but there was nothing left to do, and Arthur just left. They broke up. Maddie suffered, but soon the learning process, dance class, and everything else squeezed the sadness out of her. She still went out with the girls. Arthur tried to approach her once more at the disco, but she didn't want to be with him. And then he disappeared from the city. Nobody saw him or knew where he was. So to the store? The father looked at his daughter. Yes, she nodded her head. Maddie was finishing 11th grade, so she needed to buy a nice dress and shoes. Oh, I can't even believe school is behind us, the woman said to her daughter. I can't believe it myself, she admitted honestly. Okay, enough about that, come on. Pick out a dress. Michael pointed to the rows of beautiful evening gowns. Maddie did nothing but change dresses and twirl in front of the mirror. They all looked good on her, but she chose the one she thought was the prettiest. At the graduation, they all stood together. Teachers and the principal congratulated them and said some words of encouragement. After that, they moved to the hall, where the tables were already set. When the fun was in full swing, a friend pushed Maddie in the side. She looked up and saw Arthur walking toward them. Can I talk to you? He came up to the girls. No, she said and turned away. She didn't want to talk to him or see him at all. Why you don't want to socialize? I don't understand at all why things fell apart with you then. You wouldn't leave, he insisted on his own. Okay, let's go. Maddie left the table and walked with Arthur toward the exit. She didn't want to get into it in front of everyone. Outside? He clarified. Yes, she nodded. They walked out of the school. Tell me, why are we together? He asked. What are you talking about? It's been so many years and you show up and ask why we're not together? She was very surprised. All this time I remembered you wanted us to be together. You wanted to hug the girl. I forgot to ask. She didn't look at the guy. Give me a chance, he pleaded. Come back tomorrow. Maybe something will work out. She walked back to where everyone else was. But Arthur didn't wait until tomorrow. He saw all the graduates begin to board the bus. He knew where they were going. There was a sunrise meeting ahead. Maddie, he approached her from behind. God, why scare him like that? She turned to him. I love you and I want to be with you. He hugged the girl. At that moment, she gasped. It was so beautiful. The dawn was just beginning, and here he was, confessing his love. Okay, let's try again, she smiled. Arthur said nothing. He kissed her shoulder, then her neck. Mom, I'm home, she came the next day. That was a nice walk. She saw her daughter's makeup smudged a little. What's your view? She pointed to her face. I need to tell you something. Maddie went into the room and started to change. Something serious? The woman tensed up. Arthur and I are back together again. She didn't turn around. What? Why do you need him? You know what I heard about him? My mom couldn't believe it, because they say you can't walk into the same river twice. You know, until you step on your own rake, nothing works. My daughter was in her pajamas. She was going to get some sleep. Michael, can you imagine? They're back together. The wife went out into the other room, and she was saying this to her husband. Stay out of it. Things could happen fast now, he warned. You know what Leslie told me about him? She sat down next to him. And what is it? He was ready to listen. He uses not only alcohol, but a lot of other things, Elizabeth whispered. Oh, it's all your gossip. Michael couldn't believe it. Okay, we'll see what happens. Elizabeth wanted her daughter to be happy. She needed to enroll, but because of her meetings with her boyfriend, she didn't want to leave this town. Let's go together, she suggested to her. Are you serious? She was so excited. She was ready to go anywhere. They lived together, and Arthur did drink a lot, bringing strange people home with him. Maddie didn't like it, but she kept quiet because she loved Arthur and didn't want to fight with him. Where are you going at night? She asked him as he was about to leave. It's none of your business, he'd leave. Come back in the morning. And when Maddie pestered for an explanation, lied to her. Sometimes the girl complained to her mother. She cried, told her to leave him. But Maddie couldn't. She loved this man so much that she stayed with him. If this keeps up, it won't be long before we break up, she warned him. Come on, he was humming the girl. You'll see, she threatened him with her finger. Arthur was afraid that the girl would leave him because the apartment they lived in was rented by her father. Therefore, after they fought, the guy took all measures to make up. Once Arthur decided to relax a little, went to a bar, which was not far from home. He went to the bar, where another young man was sitting. Can I have a drink? Arthur asked the bartender. Of course, replied the man. Is it bad too? The one who was sitting there asked him. Don't you get? Arthur moved toward him. Austin, the stranger, held out his hand. Arthur, the man replied. Pleasantly, the young man was dressed normally. He was sitting there just drinking. At that moment, Arthur was also poured. He lifted the glass and looked at his new acquaintance. Come on, cheers to us, Austin said. They started talking, all the while drinking. What's your problem? Arthur asked the young man. Oh, that's a long story, he grumbled and waved it away. It's hard to sit here alone and pour. He looked at the counter where one glass after another was being placed. Very much so, exhaled the man. Tell, was ready to listen and support, already almost a friend. What's to tell? We were living normally, and then it started. He took the glass again. With his wife? Arthur clarified. Yep, he looked off in the distance. More people had come into the bar. So what, you cheated? The guy was pulling words out of Austin. I was a regular guy then. I was in college. I knew a lot of things, and I knew how to do a lot of things. Austin began his story. I see. Arthur prepared to listen. Bethany had come to pick up some paperwork. We bumped into each other in the hallway. Everything fell out of her hands, and I sat down to help her pick it up. One of the forms said something about oil deposits. I wondered, asked, at which point Austin stopped talking. He decided to wet his throat again. Wow, were they oil tycoons? Arthur was all ears now. You could say that, but I didn't know it at the time. I had only seen the papers. Our institute specialized just on this topic, so I was interested. I began to tell what I knew, and Bethany walked on and smiled. As it turned out later, she only works with documentation, and doesn't understand anything about it. Austin shook his head. Wow, like a fairy tale, Arthur gazed mesmerized at his new acquaintance. That's what I thought at the time. We met, he asked me out. I don't know who liked me better, her father or herself, but from that moment on, I was part of their family. He puckered his lips as if remembering something. Why the father? I didn't understand the interlocutor. He was sick of his job. Once he got a half-empty well, as many people thought. But he developed it, dug next to it, and there was oil. He's been in business ever since. I knew a lot about the subject. We talked to him for hours a day. And then he told his daughter that I was perfect for marriage. Austin sighed heavily. And you got married? Arthur guessed. Yeah, we started living together, working with my dad. I thought Bethany and I were made for each other, that we'd always be together, never be apart. And she did this to me. He took another sip. What did you do? Now Arthur was very interested in the story. As long as I was a simple guy, she loved me, and then everything changed. We started working, I started having money. We built a house, bought everything we needed. One day I came home and she was making out with our driver, and it looked like Austin was about to cry. Wow, shook his head at his new buddy. That's what I thought too, and I asked her to come to her senses and come back, and she said I'd become like her father. So 7 years of our marriage went down the drain. He took the glass and drank it all down. They exchanged phone numbers. Austin promised to keep in touch with him and to get him a job. As Austin had had enough, he went home. Arthur volunteered to walk him home, but it seemed that a car was waiting for him. That's it, come on, I'll call you tomorrow, he told his new friend. When he got home, he told Maddie nothing. She looked at her husband, who was staggering from side to side. She didn't talk to him. She just went to bed. Arthur sat there thinking how he could get money out of his new boyfriend. I'm off to study, she told him this morning, got dressed and left, doesn't even know if he heard or not. The couple's relationship was very strained. Maddie was even beginning to think that her mother was right when she told her that this guy was no match for her. Hi, at this point Arthur dialed Austin's number. Hello, the man remembered who was calling him. You promised to think about getting me a job, the young man reminded him. Yes, he agreed, only because he always kept his promise. Come to my office. Arthur was very cheerful. He walked, and on the way he thought, just to get a grip, and then he would think of something. Hello, a well-dressed man greeted him. Hello, for some reason, Arthur's getting agitated. Come in, I have something for you. He opened the door for him. Okay, thanks. He was trying to be polite. They sat and talked for a long time, and at the end Austin said that he was taking Arthur into production as a specialist. It was a happy thing. They said goodbye, and Arthur went home. Maddie, I got a job, he told the girl. I congratulate you, she said cheerlessly. Why so sluggish? He stood up and walked over to her. Don't, she already knew what he was going to start doing. Okay, look, don't regret it later, and he left the house again. Maddie breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't know what to do with this relationship. Arthur went to work. He asked his boss to walk with him. It was for a reason. He wanted everyone to see who had brought him here. This is where you'll be working, Austin showed me. Well, who's going to explain it to me? Only ask the new employee. Ask the boys, he pointed to the brigade. Thank you, they shook hands, and Austin went off to his room. So men, come on, explain to me. Arthur wanted to understand the principle of what would have to be done. They started showing him one thing and another. Everything was easy and clear. Now he started coming here every day. But not much time passed when the young man started to get more and more absent from work. Okay, you do this and you do that, he commanded. Why should you do it? You should be doing it. Other workers resented. You want me to tell Austin what you guys are really doing here? He called his boss that on purpose to show how close friends they were. The guys were afraid of losing their jobs, so they did what they were told. In the evening, Arthur went straight into his boss's office. What do you say we hit the bar? He'd sit down on a chair. You know, I'm a little busy today. He didn't know how to tell the man to leave. Today, I saw your workers taking something out of the territory, Arthur said, as if in passing. What exactly? The supervisor tensed. He often saw that there were fewer new parts than there should be. I don't know, but they were still talking about it afterwards, realized the young man had hit the mark. Okay, can you show me who? Austin got up from the table. Sure, agreed the guy. Maybe the boys were really taking something out of the territory. No one knew. But when Arthur pointed them out and they were punished, they were now avoiding him. Remember when you asked me to go to the bar? Austin met Arthur after work. Yeah, he was waiting for the warden to call him. You can today, he pointed to the car. Arthur slowed down on purpose. He wanted more workers to get out of the factory and then defiantly got into his friend's car. So back to where we met. Austin looked at him. Come on, Arthur didn't care where they went as long as they got close to the money. He'd been getting paid for a long time and doing nothing himself. As soon as someone complained about someone or said something that would expose the employees, Austin would immediately punish or fire them. Congratulations to you. Raised his glass to the boss. With what? The comrade didn't understand. With us working together, the man smiled. Ah, yes, come on, they chugged and drank. After that, the friends sat and chatted about many things, and then decided to disperse. When everyone came to production the next day, many were summoned to the director's office. Some of them were fired, others were reprimanded. Why do we have to keep quiet? One asked the other in the corridor. Exactly, we've already been fired. What's the use of hiding it? The man rushed back into the office. You and I have it all figured out. Austin looked at the entrance. No, we have a statement, they said firmly. Speak, the chief was ready to listen. Do you know what your protégé does all day long? One of them asked. You mean Arthur? Austin couldn't understand. About himself, they confirmed. What's he doing? I wanted to hear what the employees had to say now. He walks around, commands, does nothing, makes us do nothing, and then tells you things that didn't really happen, slings like a machine gun man. I don't believe you. Arthur is a good man. Didn't believe them, boss. And you watch, the men advised him and left the office. I don't understand anything. Austin looked out the window. In the evening, he called his friend again for a sit-down. Of course, he wouldn't tell him anything, but he wanted to see how and what he was doing. Come to my place. I'll introduce you to my girlfriend, Arthur said. Oh, let's not today. I didn't want to go like this, Austin. What are you talking about? Let's go. The guy put up his hand. Good. Austin couldn't turn him down again. They got into the car and drove off. They stopped at Arthur's house and went to the entrance. Are you sure you'll be comfortable? Austin was worried. He didn't want to disturb people. It's all right, Arthur assured him. They walked into the apartment. Maddie was surprised, wanting to kick him out at first. But when she saw Austin, she realized he wasn't going to stay with her boyfriend until morning. Hello, he told her. Hello, Arthur repeated after his superior. Come in, she pointed toward the kitchen. Why did you go to your room, or did you clean up again? He started to step on her. That had never happened before, so Maddie's face stretched. Why do you do that? The guest looked at him judgmentally. She didn't deserve any other way, Arthur assured him. Come on, Austin felt ashamed, even though he wasn't the one saying those words. The host set a table in front of the couch, and they sat down. Maddie started carrying snacks from the kitchen and anything else Arthur asked for. Thank you, Austin liked the girl. She didn't say anything, just walked back and forth. Have a seat with us, he asked her. No thanks, she looked at him. Don't you get it? Arthur shouted. Why are you doing this? Do you want to seem cool or the master of life? Austin didn't understand. And that she refuses when respectable people ask. He shrugged as if he had nothing to do with it. If you don't want to, you don't have to do it. After saying that, Maddie left for the kitchen. I'll be right back, her boyfriend said, and followed her. What? She turned to him as he entered the kitchen and closed the doors. Is it okay what you've done here? He hissed. How? She couldn't understand what had happened to him. What? Austin didn't understand. $1 million and she's yours. Not a muscle flinched on Arthur's face. And if I report you for carrying from the factory, he pointed to the monitor. Oh, you, Arthur, see you tomorrow. He kissed her on the cheek, as if he was afraid someone would see. Elizabeth walked home. She couldn't believe all that had happened. Her body was burning, still remembering Arnold's kisses. Why are you like this? Her mother looked at her. Which one? The girl didn't understand. I don't know, the woman shrugged. You don't know, so don't say so. The girl was embarrassed. She felt like everyone could see and understand what had happened to her today. She lay on the bed and thought about her boyfriend. It had never felt so good. She thought it would be a lifetime. Now they would graduate from high school. A whole different life would begin. Arnold would be the boss of their family and home. Hi, he caught up with her the next day as she was walking to school. Hello, she approached him, but the guy didn't hug her for some reason. Later, you looked around again. I feel like you're embarrassing me, she was offended. What are you talking about? He took her hand. They arrived at the school. Arnold went to his friends again, and Elizabeth remained standing near the porch. Hi, Katie came up behind me. Startled, her friend turned to her. Why are you so frightened? Am I so scary? Laughed the girl. Oh, Katie, don't start. Elizabeth looked over to where her lover stood. What with him? The girlfriend was also looking in the same direction as Elizabeth. Look at him, isn't he handsome? She said fondly. That's it, friend. I see we've lost you. You're gone, Katie concluded. The bell rang and all the boys entered the school building. The bell rang and all the boys entered the school building. Elizabeth remembered her feelings, which she had experienced the day before. It was inexpressible. When the lessons were over, she hurried to the exit. She did not want the guy to leave without her. But she didn't have time, because Arnold was nowhere to be found. What? He's already gone. Laughed her friend behind her back. Katie, leave it alone. It hurt Elizabeth that he hadn't waited for her. She wandered home alone. But when she had only a few meters to go, she heard someone calling her name. Why are you hiding here? She approached the bushes from where Arnold had called her. I'm not hiding. I'm waiting for you. He sounded offended. There she is, me. She spun around in front of him. Come here, he beckoned her to him. Now, Elizabeth looked around and skirted to where her boyfriend was. Samato, why are you looking around? He laughed. Shut up, she blushed again. Yes, she realized now what Arnold was so embarrassed about. The village was small, everyone knew each other. She didn't want anyone telling her mother about them. Shall we? He winked at her. Okay, let's at least leave the bags at home. She looked at her large briefcase. Okay. They walked down the path that led to the girls' house, threw the load there, and headed for the cabin where they had spent time yesterday. Sorry, he tucked a strand behind her ear as they lay on the same mattress again. It was okay. She liked being around him so much. She would always like that. Would you like to be my wife? The young man asked. He leaned back. Would you take it? She doubted it. First of all, they were still young, and secondly, they had only been dating for a couple of days. Why not? We'll finish school, go somewhere, and then we can think about marriage, he said dreamily. Elizabeth realized that it would all be not so soon, so she forbade herself to think. He turned to her and hugged her. She brought her face close to his. You're so beautiful, he started kissing her. Love you, she responded to those kisses. Again today they spent the whole day in their hiding place. Elizabeth could come and go freely from the house without anyone knowing where she was or with whom she was. Her mother, as always, was very busy, so her daughter did what she wanted. That's it, bye. See you tomorrow, they said goodbye at her gate. Mom? The girl entered the house, but there was silence in response. They started dating Arnold. Elizabeth didn't need any girlfriends, parties, and discos anymore. She wanted to be only with him, and she saw nothing else. Why don't you get up? Her mother came up to her in the morning. I can't, it's bad, I feel sick, Elizabeth replied. Seeing that she was very pale, her mother touched her head. Not going to school today. Elizabeth leaned her head off the bed. She spun around. Good, petted her mom. The woman left, and Elizabeth remained lying in bed. There was only one pity. She would not meet Arnold. But the girl was wrong. He was already at her house in the afternoon. Elizabeth, he shouted at the gate. She heard him, but she couldn't even get up to open it.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.